Please rise. And it's my honor tonight to ask Dr. Title to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, everyone. Tonight on the agenda is the Board of Education's budget presentation, or as Dr. Title likes to call it, the last hurrah. We will momentarily turn it over to Dr. Title to have him walk us through, I believe, the presentation he gave to the Board of Education, which has probably been updated for ourselves through our questions for the year. We look forward to that. I'd like to also thank members of the Board of Education for being here tonight. And Mr. Dwyer, thank you for, as chairman of the board, thank you for being there as well as Mrs. Manzel. I would also like to, on behalf of our board, extend our appreciation to the finance department of the Board of Education that works very hard not only on preparation of the budget, but as well as on follow-up and their due diligence in answering our questions that come from this meeting. So, Mrs. Manzel, thank you very much for all your hard work and effort. Mr. Mayor asked for a moment of personal privilege before the meeting starts, so I'll turn it over to our Chief Fiscal Officer for any comments he might have. Please, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. During one of the more animated moments of last Thursday evening session, I made and apologized for an inappropriate comment I made to the chair. I would like to go a step further at this time to state for the record that that comment does not does not reflect the respect I have for the chair or the board as a whole. I understand and appreciate the hard work and leadership of Mr. Flynn. Thank you for giving me the moment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Greatly appreciated and surprised, and I thank you. With that, we'll turn it over to Dr. Title, and we'll vacate our seats so that you can have full use of the facilities. Thank you.
Yeah, what do you think? I think so. Yeah. I think we'll do that.
What are we? And Tom, you may want to move the microphones down as well because they.
You know, do I get paid extra for this?
Get a 20% premium on your salary.
Yeah, all of us, we get our volunteer salaries doubled. So I thank the Board of Finance as well as the Board of Selectmen for being here tonight, and I also thank them for the support they have generally shown to the students in this district and this town by supporting the public schools' education budget. It doesn't mean that we don't go through serious question and answer periods, but at the end of the day, these two boards have shown support for our mission. Let me show you the first page. You can read it as well as I do. It's in front of you. I'd only bring your attention to two words. On the third line that says, every student. Probably the most important part of that mission statement are those two words, every student. Our goal is to create an education program that benefits every individual student and that holds each student expected to achieve and acquire the knowledge that is necessary to operate in the 21st century. And this, therefore, if you go on to the second slide, related to that is probably the single most important word in that first statement is comprehensive. You can't serve the needs of every student to their individual requirements if you don't have a comprehensive and rigorous program that meets those goals, whether it's in academics or athletics or arts or extracurricular activities. And therefore, the second point that this slide makes is the one that we have made annually. People move to this town because of our public education system. Part of the quality of life that people enjoy in this town is our public education system. We think the two are integral. Supporting a strong public education system is the same as supporting a strong town of Fairfield. I believe that this budget that is being presented, that Dr. Title will go through in more detail, does just that. It strikes a balance between fiscal responsibility and the need to support 10,000 children that depend on the public education system for their future. So let's go through some historical data, and Dr. Title will walk you through that information.
So this is similar to, but not identical to, the presentation that I did for the Board of Education when I presented my recommended budget to the board. There's been some updating to it and some additional information in here, so it's not exactly the same. But we do want to start with a bit of history on some of the most commonly used measures of spending. This is a 10-year history of per pupil expenditures through the last audited year, which is 2013-2014. And this slide shows the Fairfield per pupil expenditures in red and the state average in silver. And as you can see, the difference between the bars over the years has shrunk. It's considerably larger in 04, 05, 05, 06, 06, 07, and it begins to close to the point where in 13, 14, the last audited year, they're virtually identical. So over this period of time, PPE statewide has increased 42%, Fairfield has increased 21%, and so the gap has just about been closed. So we are delivering a Fairfield quality education at the state average per pupil expenditure cost. Another way to look at this, we separated out the per pupil expenditure rank onto its own slide. In 04-05, we were, out of the 169 towns, we were 20th in per pupil expenditures. And as you can see, in the last audited year, which is 13-14, we are 81st in the state in per pupil expenditures. The middle of that 169, of course, is somewhere in the vicinity of 85, so we're right in the middle of the pack in terms of PPE. And this is not adjusted for what I'll call the Fairfield County premium, which is that goods and services for education actually cost more to procure in Fairfield than in the rest of the state. So if we were able to make that adjustment, I think we'd actually be below the midpoint. In southern Fairfield County, you've seen this every year since I've been here. I think this chart predates me. We just update it annually. I think we've been in this position pretty much the entire time that I've been here. We are consistently the second lowest per pupil expenditure in southern Fairfield County. The green bar in the middle represents the average of the towns listed there, and the average is about 15.5% higher than Fairfield's per pupil expenditure. We are at 15,844 on the official calculated number. This one we did do at an unaudited basis because the state does publish this ranking pre-audit. This position hasn't changed a whole lot. If nothing else, we've been sort of closing in on Trumbull as the years have gone by. I've never been above second to lowest. Our enrollment, and this is a longer view of our enrollment. This is about a 15-year look back on enrollment and projected enrollment for next year that our budget is based on. Enrollment in the system pretty much peaked from 2011-12 to 2013-14, right around the 10,200 and change level, and then it's been on a slow decline of about 80 students to 90 students per year, and we're projected to go down by about 100 students in 16-17, and that's what the budget is based on. Our historical budget increases, as approved by the town, not as recommended by the board, have been as follows. So in the past 7 years, the average increase has been 2.08%. Budget priorities for this year as we started out, a little bit different from previous years, but this is the first year we've had a chance to fully budget for our district improvement plan. Spent a lot of time on that last year in the 14-15 year. Did a lot of work with a lot of staff. Ultimately was unanimously approved by the Board of Education in July. I want to underscore, unanimously approved by the Board of Education. That's how that's how good it was. Clearly, we want to start aligning our budget to the priorities in the district improvement plan. We also we're looking to increase our investment in maintenance in technology. We've been struggling to fund those over the past 5 years that I've been here. The clock is ticking on that. If there was any way for us to move that up into what might be a normal level going forward that would keep future budget increases down, this was a chance to do it if possible. Wherever we found historical expenditures out of whack, either underfunding or overfunding certain lines, we wanted to adjust those lines so that the budget was not, did not have lines in it that were basically phantom lines. We're hoping when we do a budget that it's not a work of fiction. And of course, funding all contractual obligations and state federal mandates, that takes up, the vast majority of our budget, and we have to, of course, do that in the process of developing a budget. So those were our goals, if possible. A brief walk down memory lane. Every year, we give you this Venn diagram with the overlapping dollar signs that show the connection among the three. These are the major reform initiatives we've been dealing with for at least the last 3 years. And on top of those, other mandates keep rolling in. And none of them ever roll out. So they come in and they stay in. You might remember the dyslexia mandate from last year, the Foundations of Reading Survey. New ones this year, mandates on training for restraint and seclusion, and to start to develop social emotional learning competencies in students. This is your legislature at work. We don't ask for these, they come to us. Again, I'm waiting for the year, obviously it's not going to happen in my time here, waiting for the year one of these balls bounces out. That will be a good one. Just because you probably haven't committed the district improvement plan to memory, I thought I should just give you an overview. There are basically 4 core strategies we have that we believe if we aggressively address these main strategies, this will lead to greater student learning in the system and achieving that mission that Mr. Dwyer mentioned. So the rigorous comprehensive instructional program is obviously a key component to all of this. We have spent a lot of our time working with teachers, administrators, and others to work effectively in teams so the classroom practices can be improved. We have also planned to have been working on strengthening the instructional leadership capacity of not just the administrators, but also of teachers, and doing everything we can through this budget and what other means to provide appropriate educational resources. So those are the 4 core strategies that we try to prioritize our budget around. So there are instructional program improvements in this budget. Not all of these require an increase in funding. Some of this is reallocating existing funding. In some cases, there are some increases, and I'll point out where those are. They're not all FTE additions. Some of them are text and materials, for example, that have been a long time coming. Because the instructional program is obviously the core of what we do. So not everything that I'm going to list here necessarily is an add-on, but that we are constantly trying to improve the school system. In the budget book, we actually have a list of the improvements over the last 5 years. In this budget, we will be implementing revision to our social studies curriculum. That's being developed right now. Middle school computer literacy is under revision for grades 6 and 8. While we have a keyboarding program at the middle school, currently it is substandard, and a number of students cannot get into it, and they end up in study halls, and the equipment is aging. So while this is not a new program, it's an improvement over an existing program. And in continuing with the second year of a 3-year plan that the board has and is in the district improvement plan, is building out our elementary world language program to grade 3. Can talk more about that later, but the ultimate goal is to have a program in, like all of our other academic subjects, that starts in kindergarten. Even with this expansion, I might point out that there still will be less instruction in Spanish in the elementary grades than we had when I came here, because it was cut back dramatically in 2011 and 2012. So rather than simply putting it back into the same grades we had before, we're trying to take a little more thoughtful approach to it. So even though we're expanding it, it's still not back to where it was. There's a little editorial comment. We are budgeting for new textbooks. We've had a mathematics program that was revised a couple of years ago at the elementary level. At that time, there were no textbooks that we felt met our needs. Everybody was realigning their textbooks to the Common Core. We've been running a math program without a textbook. It's probably been the #1 request of board members and parents of can we find a textbook to help, particularly help the parents at home to help their kids with math. World language textbooks, the last 2 courses in the high school sequence, and the beginning of the social studies textbooks. We did not budget to do the full-blown social studies textbook adoption because if we're doing a math adoption in grades K to 5, we didn't want to overwhelm the teachers with 2 books, and because elementary teachers teach everything, and also kept the budget a little more under control in that area. Trying to reach every child, of course, means that certain students struggle, and more resources at the intervention level, particularly at K-5, and classroom libraries will go a long way towards early literacy, which, of course, if we catch that early, that's the time to do it. There's a small sum of money to expand clubs and activities in grades 6 to 8. That was also cut back in 11-12. And it's also in our district improvement plan to get more kids involved in more after-school activities than we currently do, so they feel more connection to the school. And there's definitely a demand for that, and it's a very modest, probably a $12,000 number, but it is something we thought was important. Investing in facilities, maintenance, and technology. I mean, because you know that we did save money with our switch over to the health insurance, that's not a big reveal coming later because you know all about this. While we didn't sort of take all of that money and plow it back into the school district, it really gave us an opportunity to make up for a lot of lost time that have happened in the facilities and the maintenance in the technology accounts, some of which we're still not back to pre-recession levels or what our real needs are. So maintenance projects themselves, there is an increase there from 634 to 817, but still there's over $700,000 worth of other priority projects that we did not put in to this budget that we could easily justify. Painting and paving, the increases are shown there, but that gets us just about a little bit above where those accounts were pre-recession. So they look like big increases in the budget, but the fact is that we're really just bringing them back to normalized levels, and the more you let that stuff go, the worse it gets, the more expensive it is, and they end up being big projects instead of little projects. Another area we're trying to beef up as well that sustained massive cuts in the recession area was school furniture and equipment. We are making an increase there of about $38,000. The pre-recession funding for this was $440,000. Snow removal is in the historically underfunded category. I realize this is a bad winter to make this argument. I do like the first selectman's point, though. We're budgeting for next winter. I'm stealing that line. We have historically spent in the vicinity of, $175,000, $200,000 for snow removal. We only budget $100,000. Even this year, we'll probably spend $50,000 or $60,000, despite the little amount of snow we have. So bumping this up to $130,000 is hardly going, overboard. But again, it's one of those historically underfunded accounts. On the technology side, probably the biggest thing is trying to stay on top of our capital replacement of our aging equipment. That's where the big investment is here. Even with that, and Nancy Burns gives her regrets that she can't be here to talk to this directly. We have some staff here, and I know she's going to come to a later meeting, but our needs in terms of the replacement schedule that we have are significant, and we are looking to get that number up, and I really feel like if we can get that number up on the replacement level to about the $2 million level, then I think that's a really comfortable number to stay going forward with, and will not require massive infusion every year. So I think once we get it to this point, future budgets will be much smoother in this account. So we are making some other improvements in technology, but they don't have the dollar impact that the capital replacement does. So really, that's where I'm doing a lot of the big reinvestment is in our capital replacement of our aging computer equipment. All right, so how can we afford all these things and still have a decent budget number? Of course, I think you know this, but have to bask in it for a few slides anyways. Because it really comes down to what we're able to accomplish on the health insurance side. It's not the first time that we've been working on this. I mean, this is not, we didn't wake up this year and say, oh, this is the year we're going to save on health insurance. And we try it every year. And I've listed a variety of ways that we've done that. And sometimes it's been, close to $1 million in savings through a lot of work on a lot of people's part. However, nothing approaches the partnership plan, which we've gone over now in at least 2 meetings with the Board of Finance and maybe 1 with the Board of Selectmen. And so just to recap for the studio audience, we're changing all eligible employees to the partnership plan. These are all the unions plus all the non-union personnel, which will give us equivalent coverage at substantial savings. It is have this egalitarian effect. Right now we have about, I don't know how many, a dozen different health insurance programs scattered through all the different employee groups, and they're all a little bit different. So every single employee in the school system will have the exact same insurance coverage. Their premium cost share will differ because their contracts differ. What includes a mandatory wellness program. We went over that last week. And I think you guys pretty much know the drill on this by now. Just in terms of the dollar savings, at the time we did our budget, on the self-insured side, we were looking at having to increase our budget by about $2 million in that account. As a result of this account actually goes down by $1.5 million, and this is all before any of the adjustments that were done by the first selectman. So this is all pre-adjustment, let's put it that way. So as a result, then this is the budget as the board requested. At the time, and as it currently stands before the board, it's 2.59%, over 15-16. It's the lowest one I've given you. Showing where the action is, our certified salaries and our non-certified salaries, that first line still represents the lion's share of where the money goes. Of the 2.5%, about 1.5% of it is contractual salary increases. There's some minor tweaks to the FTE count, but nothing that really moves the needle here. You can see the big decline in the benefits line. Tuition goes down. We've discussed this at the quarterly meetings of the Board of Finance. The tuition is going down, and the contracted services are going up because of the switch from having students tuitioned out to providing services at the high schools. That's the ESS program. That's why that shows up the way it does. The increases that I reflect in their operations and building maintenance, while they're increases, they amount to 0.3% of an investment. Capital there is mostly technology capital. A transportation account, that's the transportation contract with First Student. That has a built-in cost escalator of 2.5% every year. That's offset by about $100,000 in savings in fuel costs. Without the fuel savings, that number would be $100,000 higher. And the instructional, on the supplies, texts, and materials, that's mostly textbooks, and then instructional services make up the rest of the increase for a 2.59% increase. Here's where the money goes. This pie chart should look eerily familiar. It doesn't really change much from year to year. Still a very labor force dependent operation, salaries and benefits, about 78% of the budget. It's down a little bit because the benefits are down. So all the other spending is up there. The epilogue to use that on the TV shows. The epilogue of the story is listed here. So the budget increase that's now recommended by the first selectman is 2.14%, and as he referenced, or Mr. Mayor referenced in the last meeting I was at, that the governor's budget proposal reduces special education funding statewide, and this will impact us to the tune of about $250,000 in revenue. So the revenue that's in the book that you have in front of you, that book was printed before the governor's budget came out, and the Board of Ed will have to deal with that at some point down the road. I believe that was actually part of the explanation why the full amount of some of this health insurance savings was not taken by the first selectman, because he knew that we were going to be taking this hit on the special ed side. So that's the sort of the last part of it. And
So
Phil,
I'll
yep.
close out in reminding you of those two words, every student. This is a budget that will meet the needs of every student, while at the same time being fiscally responsible, because in the time that Dr. Title has been here, he has always, my view, presented a fiscally responsible budget, trying to balance the needs of the students with the town's willingness to pay for public education. The 2.1% increase is right on the average of the increase that has been given to the Board of Ed for the last 7 years, which is 2.08, as you saw in one of the slides. I would remind you of the comment that Dr. Title made that he used some of the savings from health insurance to ensure that we could implement the district improvement plan and improve services to this district. But he allowed part of that, as did the Board of Ed, to drop to the bottom line. It was a balanced approach to it. And so we hope that you will review this budget favorably, ask questions, and then move it along to the RTM. So we're here to take questions.
Okay. That's it for the technology. I'm trying to turn this off.
Please do. All right, I'm going to let the members of the body get back for a couple minutes. Thank you, Dr. Title. Thank you, Mr. Dwyer. We appreciate the presentation. And again, we appreciate all the work that went into developing this budget, as well as the efforts of our colleagues on the Board of Education to review the budget. For purposes of moving forward, I have a proposal to make to my colleagues, and that is that we start out our review on page 31 of the Board of Education's proposed budget book. It would be this book right here. And I typically refer to this as the Wally Flynn schedule. This was, Mr. Flynn was a member of our board many years ago when I was a rookie. He was the good-looking Mr. Flynn. I was the not-so-good-looking Mr. Flynn. And he always said that to understand the Board of Education budget, you needed to look at this one page and understand this page. So what I would propose, if there's no objections, is that we simply walk down this page and understand the expenses by these summary object codes, and then from there we can delve deeper into the budget from that perspective. Does that seem okay with everybody? Mr. DeWitt?
About the presentation?
We can also do questions about the presentation as well. So why don't we start, in fact, thank you. Are there any specific questions to the presentation? And then I want to turn our attention to page 31, if that's okay with everybody. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you,
shocked.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Title. So
You're
the other
welcome.
night, we talked about health insurance. Your presentation said there was an $830,000 savings. But you also mentioned in your presentation the other night, there was a $500,000 buffer you put in there.
So the 8,
So
the
the 830 is
830
after the $500,000?
The 830 was a reference to a prior year savings.
Oh, so it's the
That-
800,000.
Yeah, that's not, those were 3 points, places where in previous years, we had affected savings in the health insurance account. One of those years, we had saved $830,000 through contract negotiations.
So what's the savings this year?
So
To the-
the savings this year, in terms of what we provided, is $1.5 million in the line being reduced. The line itself is being reduced by $1.5 million. Had we not made this shift, that line would have gone up $2 million. So, could say the cost avoidance
$1
is
million.
3.5.
Oh,
Right, okay.
Yep.
So the 500,000 that you referenced, that savings, the budget those numbers I just gave you, that included a cushion, for lack of a better word, of $500,000 baked into those numbers that I just gave you. Okay? So if that cushion is not necessary, then, the savings is even greater.
Great.
Right.
No, I was a little confused by the numbers, and I wanted to
Right,
understand.
I went through that slide quickly, but that was a little historical recap of some prior successes that I wanted to bask in briefly.
No, you've answered the question. So there's a $1.5 million reduction with the $500,000 cushion, if you will, baked in.
That's included
And then
in
on
that.
top of that, then there was a reduction by the first selectman of $730,000 on top, after
That's correct.
reduction to that. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the presentation, Mr. Matola?
So the $500,000 cushion is for claims that you may have to, that are going to be incurred this fiscal year that you may have to pay for next year. Is that what that
That's
is?
correct.
Okay.
So we have, as we went through, whenever it was, seems like yesterday, we went through the estimated reserve fund that will be in place on June 30th. At the time we did this budget, we still had 7 months of uncertainty. And at that time, thinking, the Board of Ed is on the hook for this. I can't just put a zero in there, a couple bad months, and all of a sudden we have a deficit. So we put our heads together with Aon, and we figured that was a good number to put in. Now, there's been new information, so maybe that can be modified, but that was the thinking at the time.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments on the presentation? Mr. Walsh?
You said you're using some of the savings of the $1.5 million. Exactly to the dollar, how much you're using?
Exactly to the dollar?
Well, can you tell me? Because these numbers seem to kind of go all over the place, and some of them I don't understand because there's additions of $250,000 and subtractions of a claims person for $150,000. I'm trying to figure out of the $1.5 million savings, how much the district would like to use of it.
I'd like to use all of it.
I know.
Yeah. So, where we put money, and again, some of these accounts, like we've always spent money on textbooks. So there's an increase in the textbook account. That's part of where it's going. If you look year over year, textbooks from last year to this year, you'll see an increase in there. You'll see an increase in the maintenance projects, which I outlined for you. There's an increase in the paving, there's an increase in the painting.
If I could stop
So,
you just
yeah.
for a second, maybe you didn't understand my question.
Okay.
Because I don't really know whether some of those maintenance projects or the books or whatever
Yeah.
are part of the $1.5 million savings, or they're part of the, what is it, the additional 2.6% that you had proposed. Because
Right,
to me, they're all dollars.
Right, they are all
that
dollars,
you're getting to spend.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's all, that's true. It's a bit of an artificial distinction.
I guess the question is,
So what- yeah,
let me try to help you.
Okay,
Are you
please do.
saying, Are you saying that out of the $1.5 million worth of savings, that the only amount that you're not getting to keep is what the first selectman at this point has reduced? The
No,
730.
because, what he's basically saying is that we can reduce the health insurance account by an additional $730,000 beyond the $1.5 million and still be whole. So I see that as a separate issue.
Okay.
See? So So here's my, and it's not a perfect science. So as I'm putting the budget together, I'm obviously going to be very mindful that I just can't come out with an gigantic number. As much as I may want to put things in there, you can't do it. And so, I've always talked to the staff about, and I'll approach it as, I think this is how you'd want me to do it. Look, Dr. Todd, if you've got great ideas for this budget, if you need extra money, then go find some savings to offset it, and we can support that. And that's essentially what happened. And so we knew in this budget that we were going to need to put additional money in for, say, textbooks. We knew we were going to have to put some money in for some special education expenses that have been going up for certain students. Those were going to stay in probably no matter what. So, the budget wouldn't have been, I couldn't have brought you a 4-point-something% budget. There's just no way that was gonna happen. So I didn't, obviously, it's not fair to say, well, had he not got these savings, the budget would have been, 5%. It wouldn't have been that way. I would have cut some stuff out of it before it got here.
Well, I'm having a hard time understanding if you're spending the $1.5 million, plus you've asked for 2.6% more. How are you not spending all of that money? Are you spending all that money?
Well, we're spending what's in here, right? Well, we're proposing to spend what's in here. So, so think of it this way: if we hadn't saved the money in the health insurance, right? We would be adding $3.5 million to this budget,
Yeah.
right? Not 1.5, 3.5, because we'd have to add $2 million to that account just to keep the IBNR whole.
Exactly. Something we're going to have to do next year, correct?
No.
No.
Well, I mean, isn't there going to be increases in our insurance next year?
Yeah, you'll have an increase in your insurance, but it's going to be the typical increases have been about 5% at the state level, and you'll be taking 5% of a lower number. So instead of for example, this year we were looking at the estimated increase of about $2 million was going to be about 10%, roughly 10% on a $20 million number. Next year we'll be looking at probably 5%. And so you're going to have you're going to have a lower percentage increase, most likely, and you're going to be working off a lower base to apply that number to.
And it'll be work like a fully insured plan, so we will no longer have to keep a reserve fund of 1 times IBNR for claims incurred but not paid, not received.
And part of my thinking, by the way, and this helps, of why, so let's say I put the quote-unquote cushion in, right? And let's say it turned out, for whatever reason, we don't need it. Right? My idea was to transfer all that money into the health insurance account. Right? At the end of the year, when you go to do next year's budget, if you don't need that $500,000, it's sitting there for use. That's a down payment on next year. So now instead of having to put $1 million in for health insurance, you have to put in $500,000. So that was also part of the thinking, that to try to smooth this out over future years so you wouldn't get this massive
Where would that money be sitting?
in the medical retention fund.
Okay, is all of your insurance money still going to pass through the internal service
Yes,
fund?
that's the plan. Mhm.
Why is that the plan? Why wouldn't you guys just make the payments, or we use your money to make the payments? From what I understood, after this was all done with the town, the health insurance, that the town switched over, which the first selectman is recommending and thinks he can get the unions behind it, and you've been able to get your unions behind it. There is no internal service fund for health insurance anymore.
Well, we do
There's
have...
only health insurance for risk management. I mean,
Right, we need a fund to move money in and out of that's separate from our operating budget, because
But
we've got,
it's-
go ahead,
It's
employee
form-
contributions.
It's form over substance. It's an accounting.
It's an accounting thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're going to take the funds from the contributions from the employees.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to take your fund. They're going to be thrown into the internal service fund. And in total, that amount then gets transferred
That's
to
right.
the insurance company to pay off the premiums.
But there is one other group of funds that will go in there, and that's employee payments. And so those go in not, they don't
Well,
pay
they're
for
the
their health
employee
insurance.
contributions.
Yeah, employee contributions. They
Right.
don't all go in 1 year. They go in month by month by month, and so
Right.
there has to be a place to deposit them. and
Right,
match
but
them
at
with
the end
town
of the day,
funds.
it should equal what the premium.
Yeah, it's just accounting. It's a method of
Well,
accounting.
the internal service funds, the purpose and the definition of internal service funds are funds that, and accounts that aren't known, if you will, accounts at risk.
Right.
So once you go to the vendor situation, it becomes a known account, so it's no longer an internal service fund by definition. So what would happen is the invoices would go through, the invoices from the insurance company would go through the general fund, the employee contributions would go through the general fund as revenue, and then the total would get paid out. What would flow through the internal service fund
It's runoff.
is the runoff.
Right.
And then it goes away.
Right, and then eventually you can close this
Correct.
portion of the internal service fund
Correct.
down, and you just treat it as as the gentleman said, as an accounting thing.
Absolutely right.
Right.
So am I correct, after 6 or 7 months of the runoff being complete,
It might take longer than
Yeah.
6 or 7 months for the runoff.
Mostly complete, but.
Right.
but after the final expenses, from June 30th of this year on, from both Townside Medical and Board of Ed Medical, once every last claim is processed through the internal service fund, there'll be no effect by the, either insurance, by the Board of Ed or the town on the internal service fund.
The only thing I would say with, that is a totally correct statement with respect to the Board of Ed. They have the sign-off, as I understand it, from all the unions. The town does not have that yet. We're still working to get there.
Okay.
But,
Can I ask just one quick
Yeah.
question? Do we have the projections we'd asked the last time for the 2017 on the internal service fund? For,
That was distributed.
it was distributed?
just today, correct?
Okay, I must have missed it.
No, Thursday or
Which one?
Friday?
Something came today late.
Yes, but this was
Okay.
in an earlier distribution.
All right. I have to take a look at that, I didn't see it. Can I follow up on your question?
Sure.
I have a follow-up too.
Sure. So, Dr. Tittle, going back to Mr. Walsh's point, right? You're asking for a 2.59% budget increase.
Right.
The 2.59% budget increase would have been higher had you not done this insurance,
That's correct.
right? Let me ask a question. When you say, hey, I saved this amount of money in insurance, right? There's two elements to that, right? The first element is, and this is the larger element, is if I had not done this, my insurance would have gone up by X,
Right.
right? What's that number?
2 million.
All right. So I avoided
Right.
2 million. I did not save it off the base. I avoided having to spend it.
Yeah,
Correct?
you avoided having to increase it.
Okay. Did you save any money off the base?
$1.5 million.
$1.5 million off the base. So the entire savings was 3.5 million.
That's correct.
Okay. So to Mr. Walsh's point, your true expense increase this year, okay, off the base, right, would have been this amount, right, 4.2 million plus $1.5 million, which would have been 5.6, 5.7, correct?
That's if we had held the insurance exactly at the same rate as,
No,
right?
that's not what you said.
Yeah.
That's, well, maybe I cut you off prematurely, I'm sorry. The real dollar savings, okay, in this budget is 1.5 million, right?
That's how much that line is going down.
Right.
Correct.
So because that line's going down by 1.5 million.
Right.
Total spending in all other areas
Is going up.
going up by 5.7 million.
Right. That's correct.
So in essence, you used, and I'm not,
Right.
this is not a judgment.
I understand.
In essence, you used all that savings plus $4.2 million within
To
this
create the budget.
To create
Right.
the budget.
That's correct.
And that, Mr. Walsh, is kind of what you're saying, correct?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm saying, because I don't think it's exactly, to me, accurate to say that you're seeking 2.59%, because you're using a savings of 1.5. Because the reason I'm saying that is because that savings is really a taxpayer savings, okay? And it just, not accurate. To me, I have to look at your budget increase as being closer to this 4.8 number.
4.8 million?
No, 4.8%.
Well, the numbers that Mr. Flynn mentioned don't come to 4.8%.
Yeah, I didn't do the math. I don't know what the number.
What would the increase be?
Well, you know, 1.6
Year-over-year.
million is 1%, so add a percent to it, round
So
numbers.
it'd be about
3.6,
3.6.
3.6 in that range. That's a pretty good
That's
estimate.
a fair point.
That's a fair estimate. Yeah, 3.6. It's a number we actually got last year.
Okay.
You
But
know.
that's the way I have to look at it, because it'd be like on the town side. Mr. Bowman, who we have on the town side, does a great job in finding savings. And oftentimes he finds energy savings, sometimes in large amounts. And if he found a $1.5 million energy savings, because he had a lot of his budget for electricity is for all the town buildings, and he found that, I wouldn't expect Mr. Bowman to be coming before us and saying, I can use the $1.5 million of savings in my budget because I found the savings. It's, so it's just a different way of looking at it. I understand what you're trying to do. I understand that the number 2.6 looks better. But I think we have to be honest with what the numbers are, because as your budget goes forward, we have to look at sustainability. And next year, we're not going to have, unless somebody pulls a rabbit out of a hat. It's actually going to be more than a rabbit out of a hat. It's going to be a miracle, finds another savings to this level. I mean, I think this is like a one-time situation.
Well, it is and it isn't, because we have taken a huge amount of the volatility out of this. And, you know, I've come into this body before where our insurance alone has been 3 percentage points, okay? And by the way, nobody sat here and said, well, that insurance is 3 percentage points, nothing you can do about that. Look, all the rest of your budget's only 1.5%, great job. It was no. You're responsible for all your money. You're giving me a 4.8% budget. That's absurd. You know, do something about that. All right? So now we do something about it, and it's like, well, that doesn't count. So
I don't
it's
think
like,
anybody's saying that, Dr.
you know, well, but anyway,
I don't think
so I
anybody's
think
saying
this health insurance thing helps smooth out the volatility that we've seen in the health insurance going forward, and if it behaves the way it's been behaving historically, we'll be looking at much smaller percentage increases in that health insurance line. It's still going to go up every year, but for example, this year we're looking at a $2 million increase. 5% on our number for next year would be a $1 million increase. Still an increase. Health insurance costs are going to go up. You're not going to pull this rabbit out of the hat every year, but it does help future budgets.
And if I could make a comment that perhaps Mr. Mottola may recall, that when Dr. Title was originally hired, he was asked, if you see needs to improve this district that cost extra funds, find savings to offset that so that we keep the budget at a reasonable increase. And essentially, that's what Dr. Title has done. Find savings on the administrative, non-educational side to make improvements on the academic side.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand where Mr. Walsh is going, in that it's to get to a number, 5.6, whatever that number is, increase.
Now, the increase is 3.6.
No, I'm with you.
That the way
Right.
Mr. Flynn did the math.
Right. But I understand where Mr.
was
Walsh is
just a
going as well.
math.
Right, but this is being repositioned as something that we've never treated a budget like this
No,
before.
no.
You've
Hold
never
on,
come
please.
in and told me,
Hold on.
Please treat
this
me
isn't
anyway.
your budget.
Give me a second.
All right.
I applaud the fact that you're taking the 1.5 million and reallocating it. And I applaud the fact that you're going into certain areas of the budget that have been underfunded, like our renovation, like that. So I applaud that. My question is, with a further reduction of 730,000 by the Board of Selectmen, if
No, by the first election.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
They haven't done anything
My
yet.
apologies, by the first selectman. If you execute this year's budget perfectly, plus another $500,000 of something else comes up, you will then, the Board of Ed, be looking to fill a $730,000 hole. because you've completely allocated that $1.5 million, which I again applaud you for. Do you not agree with that? Follow that?
I'm not sure I followed
No,
it
it would take-
exactly.
It would come right out of the medical retention fund, Chris. It's just a reduction directly from the medical costs.
The
Because what he's saying is it's
730 is-
The
overestimated.
$730,000 won't change any of the numbers you looked at in his line item by line item book. There's no line item in this book other than the health insurance line item that
insurance
goes
line.
back and changes.
What they're
How
basically,
is that possible? Because you've,
because what they're saying is that 730 is basically left over from the existing plan to cover runoff versus what they've done is they've allocated the cost in their existing plan going forward to specifically cover the premiums on a go-forward basis, correct?
That's right.
So what's,
so the
what they're
730
taking
will
down
only
is
come
the
from
reserve.
runoff?
It comes from runoff. It comes from the reserve. Basically says we're not going to spend as much, we're not going to leave as much in the reserve, right? So there's going to be less left in the reserve. All the other lines stay the same.
And you may
Okay.
recall that the Aon's advice is to have a budget of 1 times IBNR to cover that runoff.
Right.
Because we did not know what the runoff would be with an extra 7 months of claims experience, we put in extra money in the budget, the Board of Ed,
Which is
on
the
Dr. Title's,
500,000, right?
the extra $500,000.
Right.
To allow for the fact that maybe the claims experience will go south on us. Well, in fact, it went north on us. And so Mr. Tetro said, no, I think you've got more money there for a cushion than you really
Okay.
need. So he reduced it. We understood his rationale.
Okay.
And it won't, as long as everything stays even.
Those numbers stay the same.
Right.
Yeah, I
so
get
Yes.
it.
the-
Okay.
you know,
That's the risk.
that's
then
the
that's-
risk.
then
And
that's good
if they
news.
go
All right.
south,
I still
we have an
applaud you
issue.
for taking
Right.
1.5 million and reallocating it to.
Thank you.
Well, and I think Mr. DeWitt makes a good point, and I want to clarify something. We're not recutting the way we're looking at the budget, okay? And no one is looking and saying that the medical insurance adjustment is a bad thing. We're actually saying it's a very good thing. What Mr. Walsh is doing, in my opinion, right, and I think he's right on this, is he is basically looking and saying, in order for this to go up by 4.2, spending in general and everything other than medical insurance had to go up by 5.7. It's
That's
just the way
correct.
math works.
Right.
Right?
That's correct.
I don't view that as a judgment statement. I view that as a math statement, right? It's just fact, right? The budget is going up by 4.2 after reduction year over year of 1.5. That means the total increase in all other areas is 5.7.
It's just a new way to look at it because we have brought in budgets with reductions in other lines in previous years.
So let me ask you a question then.
Yes.
Okay? Because I look at it similarly to Mr. Walsh, and I can also appreciate the fact we saved 1.5. But my question is, when I look at some of the things, or my comment is, when I look at some of the things on your presentation in the budget book, such as an extra $1 million in curriculum, such as an
Textbooks,
extra
yep.
$600,000 in technology, right? I want to know, and this is more to the point, that we're not establishing a new baseline, and the expectation is we're going to spend that again next year, because you're spending a heck of a lot in new textbooks this year, right?
Right.
In like 5 different areas. Now,
Right.
my expectation isn't that you come back next year and say, oh, by the way, I want to keep that at the same level and replace all the textbooks again. And my expectation is that when you buy technology next year, you're not coming back and saying, by the way, remember I did it last year? I'm going to do it again, right? Which is the point is, and I'm asking the question, are these one-time catch-up adjustments, or are you trying to establish a new baseline going forward?
So the answer is, it depends. Okay? So with textbooks, there is fluctuation year over year in textbooks depending on what's coming up on the curriculum cycle. So in years where you have a big adoption, and years where you're buying, say, social studies for K to 12, or science for K to 12, language arts K to, those are going to be heavy adoption years. And you try to spread those out so you don't get these peaks and valleys in it. The way I see that particular account going, knowing what's coming up on the cycle, is that that account, and one reason why we tried to get it to where we needed to get it, is that we're in a cycle right now of replacing a lot of our academic textbooks. That cycle is going to last, in my view, the way our schedule is in here, and it's right in here.
It's in the supplemental
It's
schedule.
right. It's going to last for 2 years, and then it will drop off. All right, so what I would expect if I were doing this budget next year is something similar, probably somewhat lower, but not all the way back down. Okay? Lower than the number you have, but not back to the round numbers of 400,000 number. Right? This is going from a 400,000 to, $1.2 million, something like that. So it'll come down from that number, but not all the way back down. But 2 years from now, once we've done, because the next thing up is science, and that's very expensive. Once we make it through that, then it's going to, nosedive.
What about technology?
Technology well, I think we're in pretty good shape on all of the technology accounts. The one that I think is going to need constant feeding is going to be technology capital, the capital replacement cycle. Whether it needs to be done at this number, I don't necessarily think it has to be at that number. But again, I don't think it should come back down to where it currently is budgeted, because I think, we're just
So there's
losing.
a happy medium.
Losing ground, right. And I think the decision on that will be, a lot of this will depend on what are your other expenses looking like next year, right? I mean, let's face it. I mean, one of the reasons I'm playing catch-up on a lot of this is the board's had some fixed costs that have been really costly. And it's squeezed out our ability to,
But you just said the key thing.
Yeah.
If you're playing catch-up, I get this.
yeah,
If we're saying that the new baseline is going to go up by X percentage every year.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right.
See, I understand using the savings on the medical account
Right.
to address other areas. I get it.
right. So I
But,
think,
and
Yeah.
I'm not trying to put words in anybody's
Yeah.
mouth, but that's just the way I'm looking at
Right.
this.
yeah, so I don't think you're necessarily locked into this same number year in and year out, but
Right.
all depends on the rest of it.
I'm going to go, I think Mr. Becker was first, and then Mr. Timniak, and then I'm going to go to Mr. Matola, because that's the order I saw. So Mr. Becker.
So, if the claims experience goes south on us, is it going to come out of your budget, or is it going to come out of the overall fund? This would occur deep into next year's budget, possibly even, towards the end or after. But what's going to happen then? Because the more that we slice that down, and I get it, the way, Aon runs their projections, but at some point, we do run the risk that if some of the things you talked about the other night, about people trying to rush out at the end and, whatnot, and
Do we have a choice
problem.
in that?
I'm asking, I mean, it's a question, I mean, because.
I think actually, I think Mr. Tetro or Mr. Mayor addressed that question. So you want to do it again? I think the question was, what if we get into next year and for whatever reason, the runoff is insufficient to cover it? How do we
Then
make
there's
it
a
up?
deficit in the internal service fund at the end of the year, which you've
Gotta
had.
be- And it's got to be addressed.
Right.
The question is, who has to address it?
Right.
It doesn't have to be addressed in that same year.
I'm not saying it
Yeah.
does, I'm just saying it's got to be
And-
addressed.
Yeah, and the assumption we've been working with and we've been talking through is the Board of Ed will pay for any of their health insurance costs.
So if if their budget needed to be increased next year because the runoff was higher than expected, the expectation would be that they budget to cover that runoff.
Correct.
Or you just, I'm not disagreeing with anybody, I'm just saying there isn't, just close out the account and fold it into the total fund balance. Would be the prerogative of the administration and the Board of Finance.
Mr. Becker, does that answer your question? or
Well,
not?
but if we did that, essentially, then the town side, eventually, through one method or another, would have to make up that hole. I mean, because.
If it was
I
done
know we've
that
run
way, not
deficits
through the
in
Board
there.
of Education.
Yeah.
Yeah, and which is why I'm asking.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if I have I mean, there's two scenarios, those are the same two scenarios that,
And-
again, nobody has a real,
And if I can comment, the purpose
Answer,
of
but-
the cushion
Was
was
to
to
stop
guard
that
against
scenario.
that.
Right.
But our board clearly, I think for many years, has said we are responsible for our health costs. And if we have a deficit, we have to make it up in some way. But we would have preferred to keep the cushion in there so we're not having to look at next year's budget to pay last year's expenses. That's a judgment call.
Mr. Timiak, you were next, and you were patient. You also- Thank you.
My question's on page 4 of the slide sheet. You said in the presentation, it sort of dropped, student enrollment's dropped by 90 students on average the last 3 years. And
Page 4 or
page 4?
Slide 4.
Slide 4.
It's slide 8.
slide 8?
Page
Okay.
4.
Yep.
Yeah. Can you briefly talk about student enrollment, where you see it stopping? I mean, are we going to continue to decline by 90 students? What's the projection moving forward? Because when I do the math, it's over 300 students, which is getting close to one full school our town's losing. So that's a concern of mine.
Yeah, that's over K to 12. So we just had an updated projection, and I'm going to give you a general idea of it off the top of my head, but I believe we've given out the full 10-year projection that was just done. But basically, what the projections are that we're going to be in the slight downdraft for another 2 to 3 years. Then it's going to plateau. Then it's going to start going back up again. So we're in sort of this temporary trough, but it's expected to turn around and start going back up. What's happening now is our high school enrollment has been, peaking. We're basically at 3,000 kids at the high school level, 1,500 in each school. So the way we've done this is basically been adding positions to cover the additional students at the high school level. The elementary enrollment's been dropping. We've been reducing positions at the elementary level because we don't have the students there to teach. So I think we're still in a slow downdraft there, but it will pick up again. And I think we saw that when we were discussing the Holland Hill situation. If you remember, it was sort of a dip, and then all of a sudden it was back up at 440 kids. That's pretty much parallel to what the rest of the system looks like in terms of the latest projections.
So slight downdraft, is that basically you saying it's going to continue at this projection, 90 students for the next 3 years or so?
It's about that, yeah.
And we can get you the 10-year sheet.
Right.
But essentially, at the end of the 10 years, we're more or less back at the 9,900 students. So it's,
Down and back up.
down and back up.
So you think within the next 10 years, we'll get it back up to 10,275 students?
I don't think it ever goes back to 10. I think it goes up into the 9s, though.
Yeah.
So
Why don't we send that out to everybody instead of my guessing on it? You
Can we have a
take a
follow-up
look at
item
it.
on that?
Yeah, we'll just send it out to you. We have a single page that lays the whole thing out.
Did the projections show us off the top of your head, did it get us in the 8s? Are we headed to 8,000 enrollment? High 8s?
I can't remember where the bottom is.
I don't recall that, but we'll
I don't
get
think
you
it
the
ever
sheet.
quite's getting down to 8,000, but it gets maybe into the 8s at
Into
some
the
point.
8s.
Yeah.
All set, Mr. Timian?
Yeah, you also talked about the math textbook thing, real quick.
Yes.
And you mentioned that I think you used the word delay on that. What's the holdup on the math textbooks?
Well, the holdup was that at the time we did the math curriculum at the elementary level, we were right in the middle of this switch over to the Common Core. And the state was changing its whole testing system, changed the curriculum, and the publishers, in our view, and again, this was all these math textbook reviews are done by teachers who actually have to use it. And the guidance of the curriculum leader, but it's the teachers who are doing the work on this. And they basically looked at it and said, we're going to stay with what we have until such time as the publishers catch up and we see where the deficiencies are and new textbooks are written. There's always a lag on that. And now we believe we're at the point where there's sufficient choices that are appropriate. We have a group of teachers, again, elementary teachers, with the curriculum leader reviewing all the possible textbooks, and we're anticipating they will bring back a recommendation to the Board of Education sometime this spring, and if the Board of Education adopts it, then we wanted to make sure that we had the money in the budget to buy it. So there's no textbook been identified, but we had to budget for one, and so we took an estimate of what the typical textbook costs at the elementary level, and that is in the budget.
So how many years have we been sort of lagging behind in our math textbooks for elementary students?
Well, the curriculum was, I don't know, a couple of years ago?
This is the third year?
Third year. We're in the third year of it.
That's not a
Yep.
loaded question.
Thank you. That's it.
Somebody behind me, correct me if that's incorrect.
Let's go, Mr. Stone, you had a follow-up on the student enrollment.
Yeah, I did. Our enrollment is projected to go down by about 100 students this year, and it went down 80 last year, and yet we're increasing the teachers, line 101 and 103 by 1, and I'm wondering why. And the other thing is, if we're starting to see enrollment down, why can't we start reducing school administration staff and the secretarial staff and the clerical staff. When you have 180 students fewer in the last 2 years.
So all the changes in the staffing are on page 140 in the book. So on the certified staff side, largely what you have going on there is that we have some unmet needs, particularly in the special education side, but not exclusively. Our high school enrollment had been growing, and the high school staffing has not kept up with it. We have been, in my view, somewhat understaffed at the high schools, owing to the fact that there's been a lot of budget pressures, and we've been trying to get by with it. And the consequence of that has been that right now, I believe we have too many kids taking study halls because we don't have the staff in place for them to take the classes. So to some extent, we're playing catch up on the high school side because the enrollment has grown and the staffing has not kept up with it. And that is also the case on the high school special education side. High school enrollment's been growing, but the high school special education staff has not been. So by and large, and the school psychologists because of our increasing needs there. So that's basically where all the additions are going, with one or two exceptions. One is, as I pointed out in the presentation, we are doing a program add of third grade world language, elementary world language. So that accounts for about 2 FTEs. In addition, we're seeing a greater number of students, particularly at the middle school level, in need of them reading assistance, particularly at Tomlinson, so we're adding a staff member there. So but if you were saying, what's the addition, the one that's kind of a program improvement, let's say, it's not really tied to enrollment or special needs, would be the Spanish at third grade. We are, and I've provided 2 years ago, or this past year when we did the budget, an examination of our administrative staffing relative to the number of teachers in the district and relative to the number of students in the district. And I showed you charts of this. I had done it year in and year out to show that, number one, while there was this large increase in enrollment, on that chart that Mr. Timniak pointed out, back when there were, 8,300 students in the district, we had the same number of administrators as we had when we got up to 10,000. So it had a lot of ground to make up. And secondly, the ratio of administrators to teachers and administrators to students in this district was extremely low compared to our surrounding districts. So the fact that you take, say, 40 kids out of an elementary school doesn't mean you're going to reduce your elementary principal from 1.0 to 0.9. That's just not how it works. At the same time, if we were to put 50 more kids in that elementary school, we wouldn't be adding a principal. So the elementary level, we are at 1 administrator per elementary school. That's where the enrollment declines have been more pronounced. We're not going to go lower than that. And then on the secretarial side, again, that's really not enrollment dependent. We need someone to answer the phones and do all the other work that secretaries do for the 8 hours a day, whether there's 300 students in a school or 400 students in a school. So those are not places I would take, because I think we've been our administrative staff, by any measurement, is very lean and very important, because at the same time, now that you got me going on this subject, at the same time, all those mandates that came piling in, all right, all that extra work on teacher evaluation, all that extra work that all of those mandates required, all had to be done by existing administrators. Until last year, we didn't add anybody. We just lobbed it on top of people. An extra 2,000 hours of teacher evaluations, they got no extra help. So we were picking up all that work with no increase in administrators. So anyway, that's my answer. I'm sticking to it.
Do we have too many...
I'm going to miss this.
What? Have to ask this. I sort of asked...
Back for an encore performance.
That's right, I know. You're going to miss me.
We will miss you. I asked you this the other day. Do we have, in all honesty, one too many elementary schools?
No, we don't. If you look at the capacity utilization of our elementary schools, we are running right around, on average, about 90% capacity. In fact, schools where people think that we have excess capacity, in fact, we don't. Dwight's popped back up over 300, and it's a small school, and the building is really fully utilized. What's happened is in some schools, we actually have the correct amount of space. I think what's happened here is over the years, people have gotten so used to being crammed into insufficient space at the elementary level that when they have the actual space that they need, it was like, we don't know what to do with it. You know, we've been putting 2 and 3, just as an example, 2 or 3 special education teachers in the same classroom. Servicing kids, you got barriers up. That's no way to run a railroad. So when, say, a class or 2 leaves and now those teachers can have their own room, it's like that's how it's supposed to be. It's normalized. So we have some places that used to be just totally jammed, and now people actually have the proper teaching spaces. Not in all the schools, but no, I don't believe we have it at this point, too many elementary schools. And I don't see that happening in the foreseeable future.
One other quick question. On the maintenance staff, you're reducing 1 full-time on the ground staff.
Yes.
Is that because we're contracting out?
That's
or-
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we started that project a couple years ago, and as we've gotten attrition in that department, we've been not filling. So this is the last hurrah of that.
And if I could just comment on Mr. Stone's question. We do planning for school buildings based on an assumption of 85 to 90% functional capacity, leaving headroom for that child that comes in over the summer that we weren't thinking of. All of our schools are essentially at that. For a while, using Dwight as an example, they may have fallen below the 85% level, but those buildings have to work for 30 years plus, a lot longer in some cases. And so while there may be a 3 to 5 year slightly below the functional capacity, suddenly 5 years later, it's at 105% of the functional capacity. So you do have to have some wiggle room, to use a technical term.
We have,
Mr. Mottola.
Oh, go ahead. I have just some numbers, so wait till he answers.
I'm going to go to Mr. Mottola.
Okay.
Thanks.
Enrollment projections.
Let's
Oh, yeah, why
forward
don't you
them
give me
along. I don't want to.
You don't want to, okay.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, I perceived your presentation at least as being one where we were trying to catch up because we haven't been able to fund some of these areas over the years for legitimate reasons. It seems like, Dr. Tittle, the biggest catch-up is in technology. Is that a fair statement?
That's the biggest single line item.
Okay.
Yes.
And can you, to the extent that you can do this, can you maybe tell us specifically what you're looking to do with that money from a technology standpoint?
Yeah, the biggest piece of that is simply a replacement, the replacement cycle for our old hardware. Right. This is not new hardware. This is computers that are wearing out, have worn out, no longer meet the needs of what we need to run. And so mostly, virtually all of the increase in this is into the, for the capital outlay, is what we call the refresh of the computer hardware. 161 has an overview of it, and it actually lists the items specifically. We also maintain printers, as well as desktops, notebooks, and laptops for various programs. So all of these, by the time they get replaced, are going to be 8 to 10 years old. And so we've basically been hanging on with these. So that's where you can find the breakdown of that.
Okay.
And that's where all the action is.
So, any more comments? I do want to get to the subject to the summary object.
So we're going to go through the summary and then go page by page?
We'll do it page by.
I have further questions about staffing, but I can wait till I get to the book.
Yeah.
We're going to be able to come back to his presentation.
Go to his presentation now.
Okay. Dr. Tittle, on page 4, when you do the per pupil expenditures for Southern Fairfield County, why don't we do that for our DIRG?
We
And
could.
And just for people who don't understand, who are watching,
Right.
explain what the DIRG is
So-
and how that means something in educational parlance.
Yeah, it's a DIRG, it's district reference groups, okay? District reference groups were created by the State Department of Education. They're now a good 10 years old on their data, and they are intended to be demographically similar communities in terms of socioeconomic status, in terms of demographics, percent minority population, percent free and reduced lunch, percent of families that have professional jobs, percent of single-parent families, and they clump them into different groups. There's no attempt to, and there's nothing in the DRGs that relates to the tax base or the cost of living in a particular part of the state. So when you're looking at costs to do business, there's no secret that the cost to do business, the cost of providing educational services in Fairfield, is substantially higher than the rest of the state. You can be in DIRG B and be somewhere out in a much lower cost area where clearly the per pupil expenditure will be lower because the cost of teachers and administrators and the cost of their benefits are substantially lower. So the biggest determinant, well, there's two big determinants of per pupil expenditure. One is the quality of your instructional programs, how many teachers you have, and what you offer, but also what the sort of unit cost is. What's it cost per teacher? What's it cost for health insurance? And we know Fairfield County is a lot more. So I find the DIRG per pupil expenditures less enlightening because they don't take into consideration the geography that we're working in here and the districts that we try to have comparable educational programs to and that do operate in the same geographic area and the same cost basis as Southern Fairfield County. So those are the differences.
Would you be able to provide us a slide on where we stand in our DIRG?
Sure.
Okay. The other question is, as much as you're saying that, I have a question in regards to why maybe we are second to last on this and continue to be. Because when I look at these other communities that are in our Fairfield County, a lot of them are a lot smaller number of students. Wouldn't you agree to that?
Some of them are.
The majority of them are. Name the ones that are larger than us.
Norwalk, Stamford, and Greenwich.
3, right? So the other 8 or so are below us. So if I
Yes.
take my fixed costs, such as administrative costs, like if I take a community like Weston, how big is Weston?
They're very small.
Yeah, very small. So if I
Yeah.
take their superintendent and I divide his salary by the number of students.
Her salary.
Her salary, his or her salary, for each of these towns.
Right.
Regardless, it's going to be a lot higher in those communities because we get to take your salary and we get to divide it by 10,000 students.
I'm a bargain.
Yeah? I didn't say you weren't. I want you to stay. I want you to stay, Dr. Tittle. But that's going to be, but that's, there's other expenses like that for running a district that are the same way. So in a way, we are under this scenario, we are hurt by the fact that we have 10,000 students.
While Dr. Tittle is thinking, however, our cost of administration compared to the cost of our staff who are in front of students in classrooms, there's just no comparison. Yes, our administration services a variety of students, and maybe Dr. Title's salary spread over 10,000 students is different from the superintendent spread over 3,000 students. But most of our costs, our labor costs, are for a teacher standing in front of students, a custodian cleaning a building, and so I don't think you can make the direct,
You can as much as you can in the dirt.
yeah.
Well,
No, it's the same thing with the dirt.
It's
I
the
mean-
same issue.
Right. So,
It's the same issue. You're self-selecting what you want to compare yourself to.
I mean, we all choose
compare
numbers
yours-
that work
right.
for us.
Well, and I'll say the health insurance is probably a good example of this. One of the ways that we are saving money as a district and as a town is because the cost of delivering health services in Fairfield County are much more than the cost of delivering services in the rest of the state. And so we do compare ourselves to Fairfield County cost structure because that's where we actually buy services. And
Look,
that's the rationale for it.
Look, there's no doubt that if you want to, if somebody wants to try to paint us as a high-cost district, there's probably a way to do it. Okay? I mean, I'm all right with that. I will say that we have taken advantage of an economy of scale here, right? And that, in fact, once you get to a certain point, there is no economy of scale because, yeah, there may only be, say one superintendent. That's there. But, in a larger district, you might have to have, a couple other people in the central office that you wouldn't have in the other district. Maybe a superintendent in a small district can run the whole district, doesn't need an assistant, like Weston probably doesn't have one, right? So administrative costs are not fixed. As a matter of fact, in Westport, they had, at last count, the same number of administrators as Fairfield, with about 60% of the students, right? So it's not the case that there's always a proportional number that way. And yes, there's certainly an economy of scale. But I will say we've taken advantage of that economy of scale wherever we can, which is part of why we are where we are. So I'm not suggesting that our per pupil expenditure needs to be even at the average number. I'm not preparing a budget for that. I'm just going to say that we're not starting from an egregiously high level of spending and then asking for 2.5% above it. Just trying to give some context.
Okay. And my questions are more in line with, is that the case? Because, you hear other people do comparisons with the DIRG, and we never seem to do that. And while I understand what your position is in regards to the reasons why, I'd like to see where we stand with.
And we have provided
with the
DIRG
because-
comparisons in other years. I mean, we
Yeah,
don't
no,
do every
and that's
comparison
what
every year.
I didn't know why we were not doing it, because we used to see them all the time.
Now, it comes in and out. There's other comparisons I've done that I took out of the presentation. I didn't show you the comparison about the fact that, we're very low in administrators. I guess I should have put that back in. The huge increase in students over the years and the zero increase in administrators over the years. And I didn't give you that one. So sometimes I don't put some in that are favorable to us.
And if we
Anyway.
did, this would be 60 pages instead of 30 pages, if we just
Right.
kept adding pages to respond to individual questions.
Right.
But we have that information, we'll get it to you.
I think, following up though, right, you look at the presentation, and I think the point is, and Dr. Tittle, I agree with you. I'm not trying to say, I don't think anybody's trying to say that we're high spenders, right, quote-unquote egregious
Right.
spenders, okay? But when we constantly, year after year, throw up per pupil expenditures and say, oh, look, we're down as it relates to Southern Fairfield County, right? And we're looking at 3,000 students, 4,000 students, 2,000 students, 5,000 students versus 10,000 students, right? Those comparisons are just as faulty in many respects as comparisons to other areas of the state. So it's not a matter of saying that they're wrong one way or the other. It's a matter of saying when the average taxpayer is sitting out there watching this, they're saying, oh my God, Fairfield is falling behind in its per pupil expenditure because look at what's going on. They used to be in 25, they're now in 80. Well, guess what? In the last 10 years, aren't we one of the few districts in the state that have actually grown in population?
Well, we had been
Correct.
But we've stopped.
We've
and-
stopped,
Yeah.
but over the last decade,
We have been growing, well, the decline started happening about 5 years ago in
I
other
have it about
places.
3 years ago, but
Yep.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Right? And the decline hasn't been precipitous. The decline has been 100 students. It's
been gradual.
50 students. It's been very gradual, where it was a much more steep growth over about a 4 to 5 year period.
So I gave you a comparison across the whole state in terms of per pupil expenditure, and you could see what's happened to that.
Right.
We've had this economy of scale forever.
Right.
We were a big district in 2005, and we were 20th in the state. We're a big district now.
You're a
We're
bigger district.
81st.
You're a bigger district now.
Right.
A much bigger district.
But at the same time, I certainly agree that as more students come in on the margin, it costs less per pupil.
Correct.
Yes, absolutely. But the fact is that we are basically we have just about reached the state average.
Right.
Yet we are providing, and this town expects, a much more than average school system.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Fair enough. But it's not like we're falling behind, right?
No, I don't think we're falling behind. I agree with that. I'm trying to stay even and make some improvements, and this is the year to make some improvements because we did save the money. It gives us an opportunity to do it and still come in with a low number.
Right, because credit to you and your staff, the last 5 years where we've fallen from 20th to, what, 80th? Mm-hmm. Student achievement's actually gone up, no?
Yes, we've been improving. If you look at the AP scores, we didn't put those in. I mean, we've done remarkably well in that.
And in the last 6
Right.
years, spending has actually gone up, even though it hasn't gone up as much as people would like. Spending has gone up in each of the last 6 years. Student achievement has gone up in each of the last 6 years. Student enrollment was going up for about 10 years before it started to decline about 4 years ago, correct?
That's correct.
Right. So those are all positive trends. We're being more efficient, and we're getting greater achievement. And that's a compliment to you and the team, correct?
Thank you, we'll take it.
Right. I thought you would.
All right, just waiting for one.
You've gotten enough.
I know. My last chance, come on.
But he's not asking for applause.
Right, no. Just no budget cut.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Brown.
Thank you. So on page 7, slide 14, Dr. Title, you start with instructional program improvements. Is that on page 152, if we go to that budget book, is that what we're referring to? These are improvements up and above what we're currently doing this fiscal year? So this is a change in this budget,
Yeah.
152?
Yes, 152.
Yeah, and
That's got a good description of each one of them. I gave the highlights in the slide.
Okay, so the slide refers to these pages?
Yes, that's correct.
152 through 155.
152, 153, 154, 155. Yeah,
Okay.
those 4 pages really detail
Where the money's going?
where the money's going.
Okay, do we have any questions, any more questions on the slide deck itself?
Well, that comes from the slide deck.
Right, I'm just asking, do we have any questions on that? Do you have
I have
Yeah,
one
my question on this is, these, Mr. Flynn talked earlier about one-time costs, right? I mean, some of these costs are going to come in as one shot, not going to happen next year. On these improvements, do you expect the cost to continue to increase in this manner year after year?
No, I do not. I think that's part of what I was trying to do here was that in some cases, this gets you to a point where that line should be good for the foreseeable future. Okay? Sometimes you've got a one-time expense, for example, under the middle school music keyboarding. Right? There's a $50,000 expense in there to upgrade that equipment. That's a one-time expense. It's not a recurring expense. Okay? But needing the .4 music teacher is a recurring expense because we're going to need that teacher to teach all the students in that program. So in that case, you've got some that are one-time and some that are recurring. The textbooks I think I talked about, that's going to wobble around and is not always going to be at this level. I think that the program assessment line, that's pretty much going to stay where it is, and a lot of that actually was really moving money from one place to another. That's not a big increase in the program assessment. So I would say that some of these would be continuing costs. You know, if you add elementary world language and you add 1.9 teachers for third grade, you're going to need those 1.9 teachers the next year and the next year. However, the material costs would not be. That's a one-time expense.
So one of the questions, though, will you need 1.9, but next year, do you need 2.9? You know, are we going to?
Well, you'll need the same 1.9
Right,
to
but-
continue third grade. If the board decides it wants to budget for the K-2 piece, that's going to be an extra. And that would be a program improvement for the following year. But you would need to, you know, it all depends on the number of sections for third grade, but basically, you need that 1.9 again. You don't need double it. Right.
All right, thank you.
Oh, no problem. We'll go to Mr. Becker. Is it on the presentation itself?
Well, yeah, and on the comparison, you know, of community, this comes up on the town side as well. We've talked about it over the years. Maybe a suggestion that I would have for this board would be for perhaps the budget committee to look at what types of, and if you think there's another place for it to go, as chair, by all means, but I would ask that there be a review maybe after this cycle of the comparisons and see if when departments, and if it's got to be slightly different for the Board of Ed, you know, so be it, but that there be some sort of a standard, because I think we still find that one department comes in with one list, another one comes in with another, you know, on the Board of Ed. Again, I think it would be helpful. Some
Asking
sort of
for
a
a
stand.
benchmarking of certain materials.
Decide what
Against
towns
certain communities.
on certain things we want to compare ourselves, so it doesn't always come in different between the Board of Ed and different departments. I think that this happens every year where there's sort of, we talk on the Board of Ed about Durg or Fairfield County or other communities within departments. We get different towns that are thrown, you know, into different charts. A standard would be helpful. Or at least a discussion if we all agree that it'd be helpful, but in my view, I think that would be helpful for us.
I'm taking a note.
I got you for budget.
Thanks.
And,
Mr. Becker?
and then I have one item, I guess on the slides, just kind of going back on the technology component.
Which slide number?
So we are on, sorry about that, we are on page 10, slide 20, technology. So that's got you know, there's obviously, I see it goes from 1.4 up to 2.0. There's a component there that says requested and not funded, 15 to 17. Can you just clarify where that million is? You're saying that's in your improvement plan, or?
There's a long-range technology plan that has the replacement cycle built into it.
Okay.
Had we fully funded that last year and this year, we would be putting even more money in. So Nancy didn't get everything she asked for. We only took it up to a certain point, but I think it's a comfortable point, and we would be delighted to be able to fund it at that number. But the fact is that our replacement of technology, which, as you know, we do completely through the operating budget, is, you know, a bigger and bigger component of our educational program. And so in the replacement cycle that we have laid out, there's actually more money there than we're asking for.
Okay, so when you talk about lines that are going to go down, are you saying that this is going to take longer to start to step back because of that? Because there's such kind of a glut of things that haven't come through, or?
No, I think this makes a huge dent in things. I don't suspect that you've got to keep it at this level going forward. I know if you look out about 3 years, we've got a real big switch project there. And so depending on how that has to get funded may determine what happens in the operating budget. You know, we've got this tension between bonding and operating, right? And we're over here putting it in the operating budget. If there's some sense that some of what we're trying to do is infrastructure and thereby qualifies for bonding, again, that's a fine line sometimes, then it's possible that the operating budget can be reduced. But if it's straight up hardware replacement, we own that in the operating budget. So I think this, in my view, is the peak. I think it can, again, I don't think it's going to go all the way back down, but I think that it's certainly a comfortable number, and it may be able to be reduced, but a lot of that will have to do with other budget priorities going forward, and I can't speak to those. I can say, oh yeah, it can be reduced next year, but I'm not going to be the one putting the budget together. So even if I pledged it to you, the currency isn't worth much.
Okay.
But I do have a, and we do have, if people want to see it, a replacement cycle, a 5-year technology replacement cycle that this is based on. This is not just numbers pulled out of the air.
Yeah, if you could send that, because I mean, I
Yep.
think one question I had on my end, just looking at that number was, could
Right.
we have not come in quite as high on that, but maybe spread it out over, keep it up a little bit, but spread it out a little longer. And then I'm looking at this million, thinking the account's going to be up for some period of time. But if you could send that over, and maybe that'll give us a little bit more of a glimpse, and if we've got follow-up, we'll do that in the future.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Any other comments, questions, Mrs. Leclerc?
On page 14, where you have the budget increases, the
And the
first two
slide
lines.
number?
What?
The slide number?
On page 14 of the
27.
presentation. Oh, sorry, 27.
Got it.
The first two lines where it says staff salaries and budget, the percentage increase, can you break that down into what is just the current staff increase and then the new additional staff increase? Do you have that somewhere?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but we can calculate that.
Okay.
You're basically looking at, a 1.0 FTE on the certified side. The non-certified side, it's, what is it, 6?
5.9 or
5.9
4
total.
point, yeah, 5.9 total.
5.6,
So,
I think.
what is it, Ann? 4.6 is the net, because we're reducing a position and that, right? So those are not particularly expensive positions. So, I mean, roughly speaking, this really, 99% of that is existing staff.
Okay. Oh, because on page 140, I was looking, it looks like 5.6 increase, so that's why.
Between certified and non-certified.
So it's
So
a.
it's just shifting.
Yes, right, so what you have going on page 140, on non-certified staff additions, you can see additions of 7.6 and then deletions of 3.0. So the net non-certified is 4.6. You follow me?
Okay,
Down below. The certified net is a +1. So certified and non-certified together is 5.6, but 4.6 of that is non-certified.
okay.
Another way of looking at it is we have roughly 1,400 staff, roughly. So the costs associated with 5.6 net versus the other 1,395 staff, it's a pretty small percentage of the increase. But we can get you that exact number.
Okay, but your enrollment's also going down, so that,
Right. But in certain programs, such as our community partnership, which services children and students, not really children, ages 18 to 21, we have a large increase in the number of students going into that program, and they require additional paraprofessional support. So just a 5 or 6 student increase in that program alone requires us to add some non-certified, independent of the general enrollment trends. You will see in here some fairly substantial, in my view, reductions based on enrollment. It's not like we kept everybody the same and just lobbed these on top of it.
okay.
So we were very careful. That whole right-hand column, certified staff deletions, is an example of that. So that's, we certainly are looking at that. We have no interest in budgeting additional staff just because they were there the year before. Everybody has to justify their staff based on the current enrollment and sectioning and the requirements of the contracts.
All set? Any other questions just on the presentation? On the presentation, because what I want to do is take a break and come back and go down to object code on page 31. We covered a lot of it, but I want to make sure we go through every piece of it.
On the presentation I do.
One, okay. Go ahead, Mr. Walsh.
On page 7, slide 13, does this budget meet all the core strategies that you want to meet?
Yes.
Okay?
That's as brief as I can be.
That's
Mr. Walsh, any other?
No, not right now. Thanks.
All right.
Will be given.
All right, are we live yet? Come back, okay. Welcome back, everybody. After a long-awaited hour and a half, we are going to turn to page 31 in the budget book, which is the Budget Executive Summary by Summary Object. We have covered a lot of this in the presentation and the follow-up that took place, but I do want to make sure that we go through the entire budget at the detail necessary for all members to be comfortable and to ask all questions. So right now, page 31, let's start with staff salaries. There's the contractual increases, the step increases, and I believe as we talked, there's little over 5 new staff. Is that correct? That's accounted for in this number.
Right, 5.6, 4.6 non-certified, 1 certified.
Great. Mr. Timniak, I just want to recognize you had said earlier you might have a question on staffing, so please go ahead, sir.
On page 32, the next page over, section 133, staff replacement. It says reduction in the budget of $350,000 for the anticipated turnover of certified staff. The account includes an anticipated teacher retirement saving of $648,000. That's 18 teacher retirees. A projected savings of $36,000 each. My question is, well, I guess it's more of a statement. The average retirement the district has seen for teachers, I believe, is somewhere around 24, 25, 26 range. Is that right?
That sounds on the high side, depending on how many years you go back.
Is that skewed by the 1 year we had?
Yeah, the one really big year that we had a couple of years ago, with 18 to 20 is probably more in the normal range on average. We had that one really big year where we had like 40.
Right.
But that was an aberration. It regressed to the mean.
How many did we have last year?
Is that 22.
Okay, and I guess here's my question. With the change in the health care, is there any reason to think that the teachers' retirements will come faster this year based upon the uncertainty of the new program?
No, I don't think it has a big effect. The new program is going to save everybody money. So some of the retirees will see a reduction in their health care, just like the actives do. So it shouldn't impact it one way or the other. That's my projection.
If I had the ability to make a line item adjustment, would you be comfortable if I were to recommend moving it from 18 to 21 teachers?
Not yet.
Not yet.
That's something that, obviously, we track that, on a weekly basis. And if at the point that we feel comfortable that we can make an adjustment down the road, we do. But sometimes that's the place where if we end up with a few more retirees, as happened this year, we had budgeted for only 14 and we ended up with more, that was where we had some unusual shifts in enrollment and we had to add teachers. And that was an area we were able to pay for those teachers because we did have the extra in the retiree savings. But at this point, I'm comfortable with 18. I wouldn't be comfortable moving that number at this point in March. Might be comfortable doing it in May, but not right now.
Oh, and then can I get a breakdown of the teacher retirements for the last 5 years?
Sure.
Okay. Second question, I had.
Part 32.
We stay on that question.
All right.
We have a question within that.
This goes over to teaching staff, and I think I roll out to page 131 in the book. I roll down there. And to the best of my ability when I'm going through this, it looks like we have the total classes for 2016 at 224, we have a projection reduction in total classes for 212. And the column on the right-hand side where it says reduction in 12 teachers, that's obviously a projection, right? But it looks like the total number we're actually reducing is 5. Am I reading that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so based upon the projections, we're leaving an extra 7 teachers on the books.
That's correct. So here's what the problem is, that we have so many classes at the elementary level that are within one student or 2 students of having to be split and adding a teacher. That's what happened to us this year. We ended up with, how many? 5 classes where, one more kid registered over the summer, and we had to hire a teacher because we have class size limits. And had we not had some additional retirees, we really would have been stuck with no way to pay for those. So rather than simply budgeting exactly what the projections are, these projections are done right after October 1st. Actually, they're dated October 16th, right?
Okay, good.
Okay, so these are projections done in October for what's going to show up in the door September 1st. And we have just gotten burned so often doing it exactly by the book that what we did was any class that was within 1 or 2 of needing to be split, we kept that teacher on the books. If it was within 1 of being collapsed, we took that one away. And so that's what we did. It's the first time we've done it this way, but we got so burned by that this year that I felt that was a prudent way to do it, because all it takes is 10 or 12 kids coming in unexpectedly in the wrong places, and the next thing you know, we're 5 or 6 staff over.
Okay, I got 2 questions on that. The first one is, these projections were done in October. Did they count the most recent projections we just talked about an hour earlier, which show 90 less students coming into the district? Or has those projections not matched up with this?
These were based on, we have a firm that we had used for a number of years who did, every year takes their projection and they just do a 1-year update for us. All right, and that's what was done when we put the book together. The other one, we were interested in a 10-year projection from them. So they came out very close. So they're not far off one way or the other. They came out, and one reason why they're not that far off is that for the most part, the only number that you really have can be off on is the kindergarten number. We've got a pretty good history of, if kids are already here in kindergarten, what the first grades will look like. We're just moving kids along, and we kind of know what the stability is with that. So it's not surprising that 2 firms looking at the same set of numbers and looking at the retention rates would come up with virtually the same numbers. Kindergarten, is always a tricky one. They were pretty close, but not identical. So there weren't substantial differences in them that would say, oh, well, now that we've got those projections, we can lop off a couple teachers.
All right, so here's my question. In the middle of the year, if you have a new student come into the class, let's say they joined in November,
Right.
and it creates that second bucket scenario where you spill over the class size, how does the
Right.
district handle that?
We don't add a teacher at that point as a general rule. We will not. After a certain point, we want to leave the teacher, the elementary teachers, with the students with their existing teacher. And the same, we might have to add some paraprofessional support in there, do something else. And so we will have classes in the actuals that will run over the class size limit because you get a couple of students in, but we will not split after about the first month. At the same time, we also won't collapse. So you could have a situation where the class is right on the number, and if 1 kid leaves, you would collapse to 2. But if in January a kid leaves, we don't collapse to 2 and tell the teacher goodbye and disrupt the kids, because a month from then, another kid could move in. Then you're going to hire the teacher back and reconfigure it. So really, after about the first month of school, you're pretty much on a fixed census. The action all happens, unfortunately, in August.
Right.
We don't have full-time secretaries in the elementary schools in the summer, and so people might come and go or want to go to the school and withdraw or enroll, and they want to do it at their school. And enrollments all happen here, but withdrawals, generally, they do them at the school. So it's always been a difficult thing when we get into the last 2 weeks of August, and we just have to make a decision at that point and go with it. But we will adjust through the early part of the year, and then we just freeze it.
All right, so on page 130, I'm looking at Riverfield.
Yeah.
The green numbers, it's 23, 23, and 23. So there are 3 first grade classes scheduled for next year at 23.
Correct.
It says 1 student below class size threshold. So
One more kid comes in, that becomes 4.
that becomes 4. So it's, once they hit 70, you're not allowed to have 24 kids in one class.
That's correct. 23 is the limit,
23
K1
is
and 2. So as soon as you hit 24, you split them.
I gotcha, okay.
So yeah, 70 is the magic number. So you can see that's a good example at Riverfield where, one more kid comes in and we're going to have to add. So rather than have to scramble to make it up, we budget for it.
Okay. I had one more, but I
Go
don't
ahead,
remember.
Mr. Timmy.
I don't remember it, Mr. Flynn.
We can come back to you. Any other questions, comments on salaries, on the salary line? I do
Well,
have one.
I
Go ahead.
have a
Mr.
follow-up on what Mr. Timniak was talking about, because I've had questions in regards to the fluctuations in regards to the retirements, and also now this new thing about putting 5 extra in, which I understand, which seems to be, you make sense when you say that. The question is, how do we come, and have come to some type of, I don't know, equilibrium between our two bodies in regards to how we've dealt with that. 2 years ago, you told us we had excessive number of retirements that created an amount of savings. I think the number was $700,000. You told us you would try to hold that number. You reported on that number quarterly at our quarterlies and what was going to happen with that. I think we all respected that, and we knew that that money wasn't just being, not wasted, but just wasn't being spent in other areas. It was just being, you were keeping that for the internal service fund or whatever.
Yeah, we actually,
to the town.
And it did.
we actually put it in the internal service fund.
Exactly, and that worked great.
Yeah.
In the next year, which is this current year, once again, there was some more retirements, but you had these class problems.
Right.
With these 5 or 6 classes that you had needed to add teachers on, which was more, which you had budgeted right on the button. So you were able to show us that, yes, I did, but it was almost the exact same number.
Right. It's a wash.
So going forward, I'd like to know we have a similar process. Obviously, you're not going to be sitting here next year. So I'm not sure how we get around it. Phil's going to be here to know if we have excessive number of retirements, plus these 5 people aren't needed. I'm going to be expecting that money somehow be returned to the town. But we'll know that by the end of September or October. And I know you can't speak for your board. And I might give you leeway this year. I see that doesn't happen, though, this year. All bets are off for next year. I'm just, as this individual member, because I'm not going to be burned by that. I have respected the way it's been done for the last 2 years. I'm willing to give flexibility on the way it happened and to respect your number and seeing what has happened. But in one sense, I've understood you don't have a contingency account. We've had this discussion, Dr. Title, and you're the
Yes.
one who's brought that up.
Yep.
And that you've used this retirement area and you've budgeted kind of conservatively, but used that as your contingency in case those students show up into our community that we weren't predicting. But now we're going to add 5 positions that you don't think you're going to need because you want the flexibility. It's almost a double contingency, but you don't know what the other contingency is. So in actuality, you're building in some form of contingency with these 5 positions. And where I'm sitting, I guess, right now is I've heard what you just said, and I'm willing to go along with that, but you're not going to be here. And so I'm just telling Phil to advise his board that if I go along with it, that's whatever. We're going to be looking at that number at our quarterly meeting right after September and asking these hard questions. And if that number is just absorbed into your budget and goes in other places, your next budget season is going to be probably a little bit more,
Well-
we're going to handle it a different way, and it might be a kind of a negative
And
contingency.
he may need a volunteer at Sacred Heart, so
Sure.
maybe somebody else will sit at this
So
table.
I'm
But-
just telling you, that's
but
where.
But I do
I-
respect that the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education has worked together over the last 4 or 5 years when we had a savings in electricity because of the work of the town. We did not spend that either. We turned that back as part of a balance. The retirement savings as well. And we have come before the boards on a quarterly basis, say, here's where we are. And I suspect that if next year we end up with 4 more retirements, but we need 3 more teachers, that the Board of Finance will equally say, okay, we see the math, we understand, move on.
What
So
I don't want
it's
to
a
see
give
is
and take.
we have 5 more retirements than we anticipated. On top of that, those 5 teachers weren't needed. The numbers came in either at or below what we needed. And now all of a sudden, there's 10 positions out there at $360,000. And, the money just vanishes. So,
And-
we'll have that
yeah.
discussion. But
Yeah, I think you also, there's some other, there's always unknowns in any budget that can blow up on you at a moment's notice. Now, right now, just as an example, I love the concept of a negative contingency, so I want to use that phrase. We have a negative contingency of $250,000 in special ed.
Yeah.
Because we were counting on $250,000 in special ed, we budget net of grants, and so somebody might think, oh, well, they've got, say, an extra couple $100,000 over here in retirements, but I'm also right now looking at a budget that's got a $250,000 hole in it. So things like that can hit you. The state could substantially reduce its special ed reimbursement next year because they get in real big trouble. We were counting on 3.5 million, they only give you 3 million.
But that negative contingency, or the negative 250 for the
Yes.
special ed, hasn't the first selectman now in his budget covered you on that? Because under his calculation, there was when Bob was explaining these numbers going up and down and how we got to the 730, we were subtracting out $250,000 for some special education number that Dr. Title knew nothing about that hit after his budget was done, 1. And number 2, at the end of that process, there was just an extra $100,000 on top of that. And I can get the numbers out that Mr. Mayor went through, because I have them right in front of me.
The numbers are correct that Mr. Walsh said. I was just looking askance at the fact that it was covered in my budget. It's not in the town side budget. It was
No,
in
it's-
essence
Yeah, it was your
left
effect, it's the
in,
$730,000.
covered in my recommendation, but it was
Yes.
left in the Board of Ed budget.
Yes.
That was my only,
So
question.
he should be, based on your recommendation that's before us,
And-
he
and
should be
based on-
covered for the 250.
and that's based on Mr. Mayor reviewing the numbers, looking at the projections
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what the runout should be. That's what's anticipated.
Okay.
So it's Bob's fault.
No. Mr. Mayor's projections are as good as Mr. Bartlett's weather forecasts, and Mr. Bartlett is undefeated against the snow.
So if I could
But
comment.
I just want to ask, but right now, and in the recommendation to this body and to the Board of Selectmen, the $250,000 is been taken into account, that Dr. Title keeps saying he doesn't have. It's being
Right.
taken into account.
That presumes that the health insurance will stay exactly where it is.
Yes.
Right, right.
Yes.
So, I think you'll get a much better handle on all of this in 2 months. When you get 2 more months of the health insurance experience, you'll get a much clearer picture on sort of the general situation, because if it deteriorates by $730,000 between now and when you vote on the budget, now we have a whole different kettle of fish to
Yeah.
fry.
And-
Plus, there
and-
was an extra $100,000 in there as well, correct?
That's how he calculated it.
Yes, correct. But, and on the state side, if the budget continues to deteriorate, they may end up taking more than 250. So there's a lot of unknowns between now and May when the town adopts the budget, and probably still some unknowns after they adopt the budget that the Board of Ed will have to adapt to, as well as the administration.
But I think, I agree with you in the sense that if we had a favorable situation, where everything else basically washes out, and we budget for 18 retirements, and let's say we get 30, right? We budgeted for some additional teachers, and they weren't needed anywhere, right? Then we would have a balance, and my recommendation would be that that balance is just held and, it's reported to the Board of Finance, and then you collectively make a decision about what you're doing with it. That's how we've handled it in the past.
And I think that's been a positive over the last
Right.
couple of years, as opposed to playing a game of gotcha,
Right.
of who guesses. I could guess, or Chris could guess, or somebody can guess. I'm going to guess at 5, you're going to get 5 more retirements than you're saying. How do I know you're going to do that? And then if I do, then really I'm hurting your students
Yeah,
by that.
The consequences are being under on the retirements is
Yes.
damaging.
But because it's such an unknown,
Right.
the only way to do it is there's got to be some faith between our bodies and your body that we're going to true up on that number somehow in October or something after you've had a chance to settle into your school year.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to look at the whole budget, and some of that's not known in October, as we've gone through every year when we go through it, right?
Yes.
You don't know what the special ed situation is going to look like in terms of reimbursement or unknown expenses. You don't know about your winter. Even with our slightly more money in our snow account, if we have the winter like we had last winter, when that budget was, we spent probably $250,000 in that account. And there's lots of things that can intervene, but I think it's all explained in the quarterly report, so you know exactly what the plussing and minusing is.
And we've left that number in there the whole year, and you've reported on it.
Right.
So I think that's a good way we've handled it.
I take great solace in the fact that I know that anything that is wrong with this budget come August 1st is your fault.
I fully expect to take the fall for it.
Mr. Timniak.
Here's a question I have. Why does the district, I don't know if it's only allows, but to withdraw a student from kindergarten, you have to do it within 2 weeks before the school year opens? Because I had that situation happen, and I tried withdrawing at the beginning of the summer, and I was told I couldn't withdraw till the end of the summer.
Well, most of the withdrawals are handled at the schools, and the school secretaries don't work in the summer. And so we're looking at that as a possible change for next year, because we've had trouble getting a handle on withdrawals, because parents go to the school, there's nobody there, the secretaries, they don't work a full 12 months, because we're so lean on secretaries. But we haven't been asking people to come to central office to withdraw. We have not had that option in place, but I think we're going to look at the possibility of having people be able to withdraw at the central office, as opposed to having to go to a school. So when we do our counts in mid-August, we've got a better handle on it, because all the registrations now take place at the central office. But the withdrawals have always been starting out at the schools, and then, or people send things to the schools and the secretaries aren't there and they don't send them over. So we're trying to make that more accommodating, I guess is what I'm saying.
Because that's something I've always thought, like, it makes no sense, because you have that number already built in 2 weeks before school starts. You're not going to make any adjustments then. And in my situation, we knew we were going to hold back
Right.
for a fair amount of
Well,
time.
what we do with the elementary classrooms is 2 weeks out, we set the classes up, and at that point, we won't collapse a class because of a withdrawal. But if a bunch of kids come in the last 2 weeks, we will add a class. So it's not frozen in place on August 18th, but your larger point is one we're trying to address internally, because we've been a little bit taken aback by some of the withdrawals that we get right near the end, and that's largely because we have not given people, or at least it's not well known, let's put it this way, that we'll process withdrawals in the central office the way we process registrations.
So, and does that withdrawal also occur not just for kindergarten, that same process?
Any grade, yes. Now, it's not as much of a problem. The middle schools and high schools are staffed through the summer with secretaries, and there's more administrative help there. So this is really mostly an elementary problem, but it's not just a kindergarten problem. You could have a whole family move out, and then, multiple kids.
And then to Mr. Walsh's point, you were talking, it's actually 7 extra teachers, not 5, which is budgeted for.
Any other questions on staff? All right, seeing none, we've gone through benefits several times.
He says with a degree of understatement.
Yeah. We need more information on this as we go forward to see what's going to happen on, the experience level on the medical side, so we need a couple more months will come through, or a month more will come through before we vote. And we'll have more information on the town side as well as what's gone on with the union contracts with that. So with that, I'd like to not, go over more of the medical insurance what-if scenarios right now because we don't have any better available information. With that in mind, I'd recommend we can talk to instructional services. It's a large percentage increase, but it's a small dollar amount in terms of it's $118,000. I don't mean that's small, but it's certainly smaller than any of the others, many of the others. Does anybody have any questions, comments on instructional services? Mr. Brown.
But only as it relates to tuition costs going down. So line 3, we're on page 37, correct? 303, you explained it in your summary, Dr. Title. There's 2 different reasons why that number goes up. But is that related to the tuition that goes down $670,000? So one's going up, I see a yes. So there's a plan behind this?
Yeah.
Can you explain
Yes.
it in 2 minutes or less?
Andrea would love to explain it. Whether she can do it in 2 minutes or less,
Will remain to be seen.
we'll find
Kind of
out.
the key point of the request.
Gotcha, I understand.
We've been experiencing difficulties, as most of you know, with a significant increase in students with mental health issues, primarily at our high schools, but it is extending downward. We had an issue a couple of years ago, you'll remember, with a tuition deficit potential. We began researching options to bring services to the students rather than sending them to expensive outplacements, and we found and contracted with an agency called Effective School Solutions for this year, and we transferred a significant sum of money from the tuition account to bring that to bear at our 2 high schools and at the Walter Fitzgerald campus. Preliminary data is excellent, and so we are planning to continue on at the high schools for next year and contemplate for the following year to think about something at the middle schools similar. And so that's exactly right. We took money from the tuition account for the 15-16 school year, and we're asking to maintain that level of funding to continue the program for the 16-17.
So this program will produce a savings as years go on. So perhaps tuition will continue to go down. Will this number continue to go up? Or do you feel that that cost will stay flat? Meaning
We've had 1 semester. We're 1 semester in. The preliminary data, as I said, is excellent. I think we'll be able to maintain this tuition line, depending on what happens K-8. But this is a 9-12 issue. We've been able to prevent a number of outplacements as a result. But we also have, I would expect that if we move this forward into the middle school level, I don't think we're going to need more funding at the high school level. The next step would be whether or not we want to bring a similar kind of support to the middle school level, and that would be an increase in this particular line.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions on instructional services? Thank you, Mrs. Leonard. Okay, seeing none, we're going to go down to contracted services. Again, percentage increase is 14%. This is $43,000. Questions, comments? There is a write-up in the book on this. Mr. DeWitt.
Just a comment for the chairman. The number you're looking at is the change to the estimated budget. I think you should be looking 1 column to the left, which is the change from the real budget. Because,
What do you mean?
well, in the instructional services, the actual change from the budgeted amount last year is almost $1 million, because that budget
Where?
has been
Hang on.
significantly overrun this year. So I know you're quoting 117. I think the
I'm
real...
quoting it against the estimated actual.
Right.
The percentage increase versus the estimated actual.
Wouldn't you
Isn't
want to
that
quote
what
it
it should
against
be?
the increase against the budgeted?
Well, I'd rather go against the estimated. Which one is it?
I'm sorry?
Both numbers are in there, I guess. I'm just...
Yeah, they're both in there.
Yeah. I'm just going over the estimated actual.
And
You
and
don't-
I,
So you
Regardless,
don't
we're-
care the fact that they've overrun the budget this year?
can I,
Yeah.
if you look down at line 6,
Yeah.
the comment was, we've been able to save money on tuition and spent it up above, so there's a great reduction between estimated and the original budget. They've kind of switched with one
I'm
another.
totally with you, Mr. Dwyer. That's what I'm saying. I think
Basically,
it's a
what
more
you're saying,
accurate
Chris, is
comparison
look
to
at-
the
look
budget,
at
right?
both. Basically, you're saying look at both columns.
Right, because in that line that Mr. Dwyer is saying, he goes, we saved a significant amount of money this year against the budget, and the.
That's fair enough.
And in prudent budgeting, you've only raised it a very small amount, $74,000, based on the actuals.
Yeah.
Or the predicted actuals, so, just so we're clear.
Yeah, no, that's good. Contracted services, questions, comments, concerns on that specific item? Transportation, this is the contractual increase offset by fuel savings?
That's correct.
Any questions on transportation? Tuition. Any comments on tuition? This is a savings against budget for year over year and up 74,000 year over year on estimated actuals. Mr. Timiak.
I have one. Is tuition, is this where I see the savings from page 37, the 303 pupil per personnel services?
That's correct. There are some other tuitions we pay that are detailed in the book. We pay tuition to some magnet schools and so forth. They're also included in the number, but the largest number in there is the special ed tuitions.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Is there, so, student transportation for schools outside of Fairfield, is that in the tuition side or the transportation side?
Transportation.
Transportation. Is there a breakdown of that in the budget book? I'm sorry to go back to transportation, of what we pay to transport kids out of district.
There is a breakdown of it. I don't, is it in the detail? No. We'd have to get you that. But when the transportation budget's developed, we do have special education, outplacement, tuition, transportation costs, and they're in the transportation line. The vast majority of this account is this contract with First Student.
Yeah.
It's 7 million of it. It's just, a big number.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't need that.
Okay, yeah, but that's all included in there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any others? Transportation, Mr. Becker?
No.
Or not transportation, tuition, my apologies.
Just,
Late night.
so you said the instructional and the tuition at this new program was saving money, so I see the tuition line going down by less than the instructional is going up. Is that just because there's other forces at play, but this particular program as a whole is saving? It's just...
Yes, you've got other outplacements going on. In addition, every outplaced vendor increases their rates every year. So you can count on, 3, 4, 5% increase on your existing tuition alone, and that will often be the difference, because, you're looking at a pretty big number, $5 million. If they all go up 3%, there's 150. So that pretty much is, the inflation in the placements themselves will knock out some of the savings.
So internally, we would then hope to not have as large of that percentage over time?
Right. Well, that's what we're
If you're living
we're
within our
expecting.
internal-
Yeah. I mean, we're constantly looking at ways to keep that number down. But individual student needs come first, and we can't say to somebody, "Well, sorry, we can't do this outplacement because we're out of money." That's illegal. So, to some extent, forecasting tuition, it's not completely like forecasting retirements, but sometimes it's about the same, because as you saw 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we had a sudden influx of kids that needed a lot of intense services. So this is a highly volatile number, I guess is the best way to put it. And we're doing our best to tame it.
But the program specifically,
Yes.
dollar for, because that
Yes, the
difference
program
is-
itself-
The difference is other items, the program itself is a dollar for dollar.
Yeah, right
thing,
now,
and then
we're
over
estimating
time
the
should
program
save-
itself is a wash. We think going forward, it will be a net savings, because we're preventing outplacements now. It's not just about bringing kids back. And that's the sort of cost benefit we're doing on the middle school, or an expansion of the program, is Andrea basically is under orders, that you have to show that this is going to be a net positive, otherwise why are we doing it? And so the high school, she was able to do that, and it's playing out that way. One of the reasons we've held back on the middle school is we're not quite sure whether we can make that cost-benefit pay off. So it's an educational and financial decision wrapped together.
Okay, thank you.
And if you look at the two line items, they approximate about $7 million. If you look at the column that says, here's the increase, it's about $120,000. So, you know, between both line items, the percentage increase really is more related to contract services that are increasing and whatnot.
Okay. Yeah, no, we answered it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments on tuition? Seeing none, we'll go to other purchase services. There's either a 72,000 budget increase or a 102,000 over estimated actuals on other purchased services. There is an explanation in the budget book. Are there questions from board members? Seeing none, I'm going to go on to supplies, texts, and materials. And I do have my own follow-up question on this. Before I turn it over, can we get a breakout? So in here, you specifically list mathematics, I'm trying to find the page, mathematics,
35.
social studies, language, and English. Can we get a breakdown of each of those when we get a chance? We don't need it right now. But if we could get a breakdown of each of those?
If you see if what's on 150 helps.
150 all the way
Yeah.
back, because I was looking
Yeah,
down.
see if you go to 150,
Are there numbers there?
yeah, the text and materials column has numbers in it.
Okay.
That may be what you're looking for.
Yeah, it is. It's a little bit, okay, that's better.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, no, it does, thank you. I didn't see the numbers there. So math alone is $500,000.
That's correct.
Okay, this is the area that I'm looking at, I'm saying, talking out loud, right? You had this one-time savings from the switch out in the medical insurance, right? And you have a lot of costs here that are not annual costs. They're every so often, every few years, right?
Yes, it fluctuates, but I will say that our commitment to this level of textbook, it may not have been exactly this high, but I think that even if the health insurance had not materialized, there was going to be a significant up in our request on textbooks.
I can appreciate that. I'm
Yep.
trying to find out what the normal is, right? I'm
Yeah.
trying to find out. I mean, you're doing a heck of a lot here, and that's not a critical.
No, I understand.
That is, there's 4 big curriculums that you're changing here at one time, and I'm trying to understand, you know, what the annual norm is.
Yeah.
Right? And do we
Right.
budget to the annual norm as opposed to budgeting all 4 at once? And I'm not.
Right.
Tom.
That's not a proposal or anything, I'm just.
If I might, is there, given you have it broken out this well, is there like a last 5-year kind of number that I think addresses your question
Yeah.
of what normal is?
What the textbook line has looked like over
Well, I
the past.
thought maybe
yeah.
what your point was the
Right.
last 5 years wasn't normal because you hadn't
We've-
invested in it. So this
Yeah,
is
we've
more
been,
than-
holding back a bit, but it's not so much, we really, the reason that we have this color-coded schedule in the back here, which is on page 151, was an attempt to spread it out so we wouldn't get hit all at once with it.
This chart confused the heck out of me.
Yes, it's
It's
not
Got
intended.
Crayola crayon threw up all over.
Right. Well, we keep making it more complicated. This is the curriculum equivalent of a waterfall.
Right.
I can't understand the waterfall. You can't understand the curriculum. We're even.
We're even.
Okay. I don't understand ARC. All right. So
No.
yeah. So we designed this. Probably the first year I was here in an effort to not just keep our curriculum current, but keep our capacity to implement it scheduled out over a period of time. So we wouldn't go 15 years without a curriculum, but we wouldn't be doing 2 or 3 big ones at once. Really what's happening here is we're doubling back to math that was done several years ago. And that's really the one-time thing that's in here that wouldn't normally be there. So once we catch up on math, now because of that, We're also not doing 100% of social studies.
Okay, but if I look at this, and I don't want to get into the weeds here, I don't want to waste
Yeah, okay.
everybody's time,
Yeah.
right? But if I look at this chart, I'm having problems saying, you know, you got the numbers up above that I see now, thank you for that.
Yep.
And I know in your explanation, you're saying we're doing these 4 curriculums. I can't equate that to the
chart.
Crayola chart here.
Right, because some of it's phased in, depending on budget availability in any given year. So for example, let's look at world language.
Right.
Right? 196,575.
Right.
Is the number. Now, if you go down to the chart, world language was actually reviewed and approved by the board in 14-15, and the implementation began this year. We did probably 75% of the textbook purchasing for that. We're using it now. There are 2 of our last courses left, the high-end courses. So we're doing, so that's it's not that the world language curriculum has been done again. It's
Right.
just that we only had so much budget money to do it until we used the new curriculum with the old books for a year, and now we're sort of finishing that off.
And my point is on that, on something like that, because you did some of it last year,
Right.
it shouldn't necessarily be a year-over-year
Correct.
budget increase.
It will
should
not
just-
recur.
Right.
That's right. So some of this will not recur, and that's an example of it. Math will not recur. Right? But science is coming up, and that's another big one. But given that the way this is laying out, we're not going to be able to do 100% of science next year because we're going to be doing social studies at the elementary level.
To Mr. Tetro's comment on you know, what we're doing.
Yeah.
I don't think it's exactly the last 5 years, but can we say, what were the last 5 years, and what do we think it kind of should be?
Yeah, that should establish a base.
Right.
And if we say that that was, you know, bought down or not used, unspent by
Right.
50% or 25%, that gets you in a realistic neighborhood.
Right, because what we're trying, I guess I'm looking at this like I do what we did with paving and what we've done with other things in the budget, where we haven't tried to do it all at one time. We've phased it in over a few years.
Right.
And that way we minimize the annual impact. We don't have these highs and lows. And we're not sitting here next year trying to remember, what did we do one time last year?
Right. No, I get it.
It's now become the new base.
Yeah, we're trying, you know, we try to smooth that out, but there's some unavoidable cliffs.
You know, science, math.
Right.
Huge curriculums. That's understandable. I
Right.
get that. But it's not all like that.
No, but if you look at a year on here, just as a hypothetical example, if you look on the Crayola chart under 18-19, let's just pick that year because it doesn't have a big one in there. So that would be reviewed by the Board of Ed in 18-19. It would be budgeted for textbooks in the 19-20 budget. Okay, art, health, phys ed. That's going to be a really low number that
Yeah,
year
I
in
would think
textbooks,
so.
right? So you can't spread your academic areas out perfectly. But what might happen there is that we maybe have to finish up another year where we couldn't do 100%.
Well, that's the thing. You
Yep.
can carry it over year
Exactly.
over year.
Right.
And smooth it out by just
Right.
spreading which years you do it.
Yeah, in a
That's
perfect
the-
world, we'd have about the same number every single year in there for textbooks, and we would just rotate
Right.
the subject areas. And really, we would have been able to become pretty close to that where we were not backed up on the math area. So we're really catching up for lost ground there, and then it should smooth out.
Thank you, Dr.
Yep.
Title. I'm going to go to, I saw Mr. Timniak first, then I'm going to come to Mr. Walsh.
I guess my 2 questions are, one, are the teachers currently under the review process for these textbooks?
Yes, all of them.
And is the Board of Education ready to take them up when they come up for this budget year? What's the time for that?
Yes, we have scheduled to consider the recommendation once the teachers bring one forward.
All right, so that's for all these textbooks?
Yes, we have it usually takes the better part of the year to do the review. So typically, you'll see these come out in May and June. That's when the board usually gets the presentations and the textbook recommendations and takes them 2 meetings to accept it. So, but we're ready to go on these. I mean, we have, the language arts is supplemental material, so that's not something that would go to the board. So the ones that will be going to the board, I'm going to make sure my directors back there are correct. We need to bring world language textbooks to the board. That's 2 courses at the high school, the advanced levels of world language. The math textbook, obviously, and the social studies textbooks. But those are all lined up to go to the board this year in the spring.
Okay, so it goes to the board in the spring, and then this is entered into curriculum in September?
Correct.
New
That
books?
gets implemented in the fall.
Okay.
Yeah, so we work actually, the curriculum is done, the textbooks to support that curriculum are approved. We then have budgeted for them, so on July 1st, we can cut a purchase order for them, and the teachers then, groups of teachers along with our administrators work on the implementation guides over the summer so that everyone's ready to go, and then on the professional development day before school starts and throughout the year, they're learning how best to implement them.
Is there usually like a 90-day window for such a large order of textbooks, or are they readily available?
Nah, they're readily available. I don't think, since I've been here, I don't think we've ever had a situation where the books have not arrived. I mean, you can run into situations where you get a back order. It's possible. We haven't really had a problem with it. We really try to get the ordering out as soon as possible. And particularly if you got a good relationship with the vendor, you can let them know, hey, this is coming, it's all been approved. We just can't give you the paperwork till, July 1. So it can be in the pipeline.
Okay. So will the board address this before the RTM is finished with the budget process, make the approvals, or do you wait for the final budget to be approved before you go ahead and make the selection?
No, we wait for the teachers to make a recommendation. And then generally it comes before the board for a presentation. And then at the next meeting, we vote. And so if the teachers are ready at the end of April, then it'll come in after the RTM vote. But if they're ready at the middle of March and we hear it on the first meeting in April, so it depends on, really, it's the ability of the teachers to come to an agreement as to what is the best textbook for this district to use over the next several years, because as you can see from the numbers, this is a substantial investment.
Right.
So we want to make sure that we're buying the right one. So it really is predicated on the research process of the teachers.
Okay, so you don't wait for the RTM?
No.
It's not a budget-dependent decision, so we want the board to approve them. Then, provided we have the budget to buy them, then we go ahead and buy them. So it's not a budget
I like that model.
waiting. It works pretty well.
Mary, he's got to follow up on this. No? Okay. I'm going to go to Mr. Mottola. My apologies. I didn't mean to cut anybody
Just
off.
so I'm trying to understand the process here, I do understand it, but for the math, would you ever think of buying some of the books for next year to smooth it out, or it doesn't work that way? In other words, how would you be, could you actually do that?
Well, you could. However, we had conversations about this because we have 2 things going on simultaneously for elementary teachers, and because they teach every subject, we can't overwhelm them. So we did consider, for example, we're holding back on the social studies textbooks at the elementary level because we're not going to, from a financial point of view, of course, it would be a problem, but from a practical implementation point of view, would be a problem. So yeah, you could hold back on that, but if you held back, say you did textbooks in math in grades 3 to 5, you'd have no reason to hold back on your K2 social studies because they're not overwhelmed. They could do it, providing the funds are there. But we just felt in conversation with the curriculum leaders, with Mike Cummings, the Director of Elementary Education, that we can put all our resources in our PD and have our curriculum leaders focused on the K to 5, bite the bullet, do it, put social studies materials on the back burner, then the next year you can come into the elementary folks with social studies. That would be the smoothest rollout and the most efficient way to do it.
Okay, Mrs. Leclerc.
This is an area that really makes me happy that you're spending money in it this year.
I'm glad.
So I have to tell you, if we had a year that we have a little extra funds, I'm very happy you're putting it here. What my question is certain subjects where it says text and materials, now that we're getting new textbooks, do they also link to the internet access? And is there an added fee that will have ongoing? Like, I know in the past my kids have had textbooks where they can do extra math problems
Right,
online.
online. That's all included in the price.
That's in the
So yeah,
price of
once
the
you buy the book, every publisher now has an online presence of varying degrees and quality. In fact, that's one of the criteria that we often look at when we're looking at a book. It's not just the book itself, but what do they have available in terms of an online companion that goes with it. But I think, I won't say every single textbook, but virtually all the mainline textbooks now have an online component or the ability for the students to get extra help online or to do extra help, extra problems or parent guide. They all have an online presence. If they don't do that, they won't survive.
Okay, good, thank you.
Can you, at this point, I know some of the private schools, the students have to get iPads, or the students have to do this, that, or the other thing and download the books and go completely digital. You can't do that yet on the
Yet.
public side, right?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, talk about your capital investment in technology.
Right.
Okay?
You'd have to supply the iPads.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, this is something that is in deep discussions with the technology and the instructional staff, and that different districts are approaching in different ways. You're right on exactly where there's a lot of decisions being made about this. So in some school districts, they've made the decision to go what's called a one-to-one computing, right? Where they actually purchase a device for every student, and then that, it's a district-supported device and so forth. That obviously can get quite expensive, but that's one approach. And then you can do it, right? Because you're providing the device. Other districts have gone to bring your own device, BYOD kind of a deal, where students are encouraged to bring their own device and use it to download it. But if there's a hardship, financial hardship, then the district would provide that, and you would have some income cut off and that sort of thing. And they both have promise and drawbacks.
And you still have to license the content anyway that gets downloaded into the...
That's correct. You're still going to pay for the licenses for the download. It's not necessarily going to save you a bunch of money. But I know, for example, what it can really help with is students not necessarily having to lug the books back and forth.
Right.
And the whole backpack
Loss
business.
and damage.
Exactly.
of the
So you can have books in the classroom, and then student can use the online version at home if they have access to it. But we're not at the point where all of our students have devices, have access at home to the internet on a regular basis. I mean, we think the internet that kids have at home is widely available, but we also know there's a number of families that struggle to get that, or they may have one device at home shared by lots of kids in the family. They may not have a good Wi-Fi. So this is right in our wheelhouse in terms of a discussion going on right now. And different districts have handled it different ways, and we're trying to learn from them about the best approach. But that's the way of the future. But we also have to be careful about coming in with, we want an extra $1 million for iPads for everybody, and seeing how warmly that would probably get greeted.
Or 10,000 iPads.
Right, exactly.
In regards to the textbooks for the world languages 3 to 5, with this new program coming in for the third grade, there's no textbooks?
There's very little for that. That's a
There are textbooks
minor.
for the
No,
fourth and fifth
it's
grade?
really supplies. No, the textbooks we're purchasing are for the high school.
Okay.
Yeah. No, the elementary program, if you go to the
It's only $27.50.
Yeah, that's
for 3
just,
grades.
supplies, materials that the teachers would use to teach in the classrooms, but those aren't books. Those aren't textbooks.
Okay, and we just rolled out the program for world language in the 4th grade?
No, we've had a 4th and 5th grade program for a number of years. Through the 2010-11 school year, That program was more or less a full-time program, or 4 days a week of 25 minutes. And then in the, so that program's been there for a number of years. I don't know when it started. It was here when I got here. So that 4th and 5th grade program was in the big budget cut of 2011-12. The first budget I did, $2,825,000 cut. Remember it like it was yesterday. One of the casualties of that cut, along with about 40 positions and a big spike in your unemployment costs that you so fondly remembered at the last meeting, was a reduction in the world language. And it went from the full-time program to the 2-day-a-week program. So the program has always been there, not always been there, it's been there for a long time, it's not new, but it was cut back. When we examined the best way to upgrade the elementary program, we decided we didn't want to just replace that, but it was better to put it into 3rd grade, and actually that only restores about 50% of it, because we used to have full program in 4th and 5th, and we're putting up basically a part-time program into 3rd. It was a long-winded answer, but yes, 4th and 5th has been there.
What year was that cut?
To fall of 11, the cut took effect.
Because I'm looking at your slide 9, I don't see any budget cut. You list all of they're all budget increases, actually.
Cut over the requested number.
Okay, but, okay.
Well, the Board of Ed, we have that in here somewhere. We have the Board of Ed requested and the town approved, and so the budget adjustment that had to be made, reduction had to be made by the Board of Ed, was $2,825,000.
It was 11-12.
If the 11-12 school year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Spring of 11.
The increase in your budget was 2.9%, but you wanted more that year.
Right. That was one of those, the health insurance fund was squeezing everything out years.
Okay.
That's what, if I recall that correctly.
Okay.
Anything else?
In this 4th and 5th grade program, you've evaluated them, and they're where you want them to be, and they're running well?
I would say they're where they want to be, because the trade-off you have to make there is that 4th and 5th grade right now has some pull-out or some instructional time that's set aside that the other grades doesn't have. So we were looking about, where can we increase our world language teaching? 4th and 5th grade has more pull-out of instructional time because the music programs begin in 4th and 5th grade. You get more of that. You get the chorus and so forth. You have a 5th grade, it's not DARE, but it's some program like that. We have kids get pulled out for lessons because of the music program. And so we're trying to balance off the core instructional time with everything else. And so I'm sure the world language people would love to get the full-blown program back in. That would be better than what we have now. But we decided if we wanted to upgrade it, based on the report that the board received a couple of years ago, that the best way was to leave 4th and 5th grade alone and begin the process earlier, and that's why 3rd grade came into play.
Because anytime you add this programming on, it eats into core instructional time, correct?
It does eat it. I think there's world language in many people's views, and I think I'm kind of there. You can debate it. I really think it is a core instructional area. I don't think world language is an extra anymore in the multicultural world that we're in. So I think world language is an academic program. Obviously, it's not taught in the same academic way at the elementary level that it is taught at the high school level, but it's taught in a developmentally appropriate fashion. But certainly, if you add 50 minutes a week to, that's about 10 minutes a day of time that has to come from somewhere. It has to be absorbed into the other areas. But on a daily basis, it's a fairly small amount. We felt that the 3rd grade could take that because they don't have all those other programs that I described in 4th and 5th. And K1 and 2 also don't have that. So if we were going to substitute one academic program for another, in this case, 3rd grade was able to absorb it. 4th and 5th grades were not.
Can we make the day longer?
The day is set by contract.
in the next contract, can we make it longer?
You can propose it in negotiations.
Okay. In regards to instructional time, where do we rank with, say, why don't we start off with your examples of Fairfield County schools? How do we rank with, for instructional time?
For like length of school day?
Well, instructional time in
Yeah,
the school day,
that's
not the amount of recess or the amount of lunch time.
Well, everybody pretty much has a standard amount of that. I don't know off the top of my head. I know that generally speaking, because it's all a negotiated item, that districts tend to be shoehorned into a fairly narrow corridor, because if your if your instructional day is shorter, then probably a Board of Ed's going to propose to lengthen that, and they have a better chance of winning that with an arbitrator. If your instructional day is longer, you're probably not. And so, like a lot of things, the collective bargaining process puts everybody in a fairly narrow range, but I don't know the length of the school day in all of the Fairfield County districts. But my hunch would be that we're all in about the same ballpark.
Jim, if I can add to that, you may remember the discussion around the expansion at Fairfield Little High School that would allow a revised high school schedule that would bring, instead of using a full class period, down to less time for lunch. Fairfield used to be on the lower end of instructional hours for high schools. And we've added a substantial amount of instructional hours over the course of a year that now put us, I don't know exactly where in that ranking, and so from an instructional hour point of view at the high school level, we're no longer toward the bottom.
Okay. Are there statistics readily available for what our instructional time at the elementary school is, where this program is being added versus other schools within either our DIRG or within Fairfield
I
County?
think you can get the state average pretty readily. I don't know. I don't know if you can get that from every school district. It was actually something that the reason this got picked up is, maybe I'm going to say this word. It was on the strategic school profiles, which now they haven't been published for a number of years, but you could go back a couple years and they usually will tell you compared to the state. They may give you compared to the DIRG. We could do a quick check on that and see what's readily available.
Okay.
But it's not the kind of thing where, if it's not readily, if it's not published by the state somewhere, it would be a lot of labor to call every district
Yeah, I
and,
understand.
get the whole thing to,
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Why don't we move on to number 9? Operations and maintenance of buildings. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Co-Chairman. Vice Chairman. Maybe a quick question for Mr. Collins. I see him back there, and I don't want. He's been here all night. I gotta let him talk at least a couple of seconds. So, I'm on page 47, and I know this was highlighted as one of the additions, or one of the funding of the $1.5 million. I'm trying to choose my words carefully.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Cullen, if we assume that norm is that 4.3 number, what are we getting for that extra $500,000 this year? And I know you guys put out a great book of all the improvements. I just don't have it with me, so maybe just in a quick couple bullets, what are we getting for the new 520? Page 47.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll give you a couple things while he's searching. One is you've got maintenance projects increased. That's
Yeah, I
about
know it's under maintenance services, but maintenance services has like,
It has a lot of categories, right. So some of the subcategories, so maintenance projects are one, paving, I put that on the slide, painting,
do we have specifics
snow
on
removal,
that?
yes, we do. So,
what's that?
163.
Page
Oh, it's in here.
163.
Oh, I'm sorry, 163.
well, those are just the maintenance projects.
The accounts.
That's the maintenance projects. That doesn't give the other accounts.
I'm kind of just worried, I'm just,
Yep.
again, in 2 minutes, what we're getting for that extra 500. Because I know in the 4.3, which if we consider that the norm, because that was last year's number, right?
That was
It
the
was
current year budget, right.
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 Only because the statement was made that
Yes.
we're trying to catch up on stuff this year with the 1.5.
All right.
Go ahead.
I think I've got a good page for you to look at.
82?
82. Thank you, Tom. Found it at the same time.
You know it must be true because they found it independently.
That's right. Well, Doreen found it for me. Now, the maintenance projects are not on this page. They're scattered through. So you got to keep in the back of your mind, there's about 150,000 in maintenance projects.
Oh, I see it, yep, yep, yep.
Okay? So here,
So there's an extra $75,000 in
painting.
painting.
Correct.
And unlike the compliment I gave you before, where you compared against the budget and the actual, you only compare against the budget here.
Well, we have an estimated expenditure in here, and we have an actual for
Right,
14,
but the
15.
change number is only against the budget.
The change, we do changes budget to budget. That's just how we've printed the book. But we give you,
Except for that other one, right, up front.
well, the executive summary gives you a little differently. But
Yep.
this gives you the actual 14, 15, and the estimated for this year, as well as the proposed. So every comparison you want. But basically, if you go down that list, where the big money, quote-unquote, big money is, snow removal, paving, grounds,
Technology services,
technology services is down below. Yep.
$83,000.
Correct.
Oh, yeah,
That's,
yeah.
yes, we've got some additions in software, technology services, software, information management.
That's under that line item, no?
It's over here.
It's gray. Thank you for the
Yep,
color
it's
code,
in
by
there,
the way.
yes. Yeah, it's gray, that's in there, correct. So it's, yeah, painting, paving, snow removal.
I got you.
Yep.
I think you've. I
You got
think
the
you've answered
basic
my
idea.
question. Thank
Maintenance
you.
projects,
Perfect, thank you.
that gets you there.
I got I'm sorry.
No, if you have
I have
one.
one very specific question I saw in a project. Jennings School, you've got a roofing project on a temporary building. How long do we expect that temporary building to continue to last over there?
I put something in the long-range plan to address existing portable classrooms that are going to be seeing a very long life, that we may have to go in, redo the siding, some flooring, look at the HVAC system, but we've got portable classrooms. Generally, when we buy them, we expect to get 10 years out of them. We have some that probably will reach 15 or 20 years. Jennings will definitely be there.
How old is it now?
It's probably 2001.
So it's
purchased.
14, 15 years old.
Yep.
And you want to spend $14,000 to put a roof on.
Yep, we got to fix the roof.
How much to replace the building?
They're in the 250,000 range.
And we need that building.
Yes.
And how much time are we going to get out of it after we replace the roof?
Yeah, I'm thinking of where Jennings is scheduled for a renovation and addition, probably in the 2023, 24 range.
An addition?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
It's a long way off before Jennings is getting money, is the answer.
That doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
I'm surprised, A, about an addition. I'd love to see the.
Well, it doesn't mean that we're adding 5 classrooms. It's just a term
And
we
B,
use.
it's just, I was astonished when I saw we're replacing a roof on a portable
Right.
building.
Yep.
We need to keep it,
Got to keep it running.
right.
There's no other building we can move over there from one of the other sites that we've already.
Nope, not at this time.
Some of them are non-movable. They will collapse. Because we went through this with, could we do something with the Riverfield ones? Remember that whole thing?
Yeah.
And it was like, the person came out there and said, this thing is going to fall apart on the truck before I move it anywhere. So,
The contractors are comfortable moving them once if it's within the 10-year period. After 10 years, they don't like to touch them and move them.
No, they'd rather put roofs on for $15,000.
Well,
yeah.
It's good business
Come on, yeah, exactly.
yep.
Mr. Timniak.
I want to follow up on Mr. DeWitt's comments if I can. And maybe, did you say that you build the budget based upon last year's budget, not the actuals?
Well, we build the budget in a variety of ways. It depends on what the line item is. So if we see the actuals are varying a lot from the budgeted number, then we're going to go in and we're going to adjust that budget up or down based on what the actuals have been over the period of time. So you look at something like snow plowing, and the actuals would be consistently over over. And so finally say, well, it's silly to keep putting the same number in because you know you're not putting enough in. In that case, we'll raise it up. We've also had situations where they're not necessarily big numbers, postage and printing, we've been cutting that back dramatically. And so as we see the actuals have been coming down there, we'll actually bring the number down. So we use the actuals a lot to determine what the right number is. So it's not necessarily that everybody gets the same.
I think.
But we do, but when we print the budget book, that last column is just budget to budget.
Yeah.
But we do use the actuals as a base to determine the proper funding.
I think the reference was how we budget the line item detail section of this, not how we budget, but how we present. And we have historically presented the change number as a change budget to budget.
Well,
It's a presentation comment, not a how do you build a budget comment.
So I think we're in the pattern of holding all other departments accountable on the actual, not the previous year budgeted.
Right, so we look at, that's why we look at previous year and often the previous 2 years' actuals to see what is real. But sometimes the actuals don't tell the whole story. So, for example, there could be a year where, let's say Tom has maintenance projects budgeted at $500,000, and we know we're in trouble. Okay, something's gone badly. We'll say to Tom, look, I know you had $500,000 in projects, but you got to hold $100,000 of that because otherwise we got nowhere to go. All right, so he may end the year with only say $400,000 of expenses because we told him don't spend it. It wasn't he didn't need it, but we said stop. Okay. So we have to be careful that the actuals don't always tell the whole story. It's certainly something we look at, but and the other thing is that, people generally aren't allowed unless there's a reason to go over. So somebody looks at the actuals and, geez, that's the exact amount that you budgeted. You don't need any more. Well, that's because that's all I had. I really could have used the $25,000, but you told me not, I couldn't go over. So we just try to take it all into account.
Right. So I noticed a discrepancy, maybe quickly, on page 55, where the budgeted number for, and I hate to go back and I apologize, the budgeted number for teacher salaries for 15, 16, 69,000, and you show the increase at $2 million for the year, but the actual is actually like 2.9 million. Is that like the same conversation we're having?
Specifically what?
Okay.
On page 55 at the bottom, teaching staff?
Yes, if you look at budgeted 15, 16,
Right.
you based the proposed budget, the 71 million number based upon the budgeted 15, 16.
Now, that number's built off of actual people who are here and what their salaries are and moving them one step on the pay scale. The budgeted number has nothing to do with it.
Okay, and what's the estimated expenditure number for 15, 16 then?
That's the number that Doreen thinks that we're going to spend on those lines by the end of the year. But that number may be lower because perhaps you have a teacher who's out on an unpaid leave of absence that you didn't know about.
Okay, so
And they're going to come back, and so we have to budget for their salary when they come back. So we don't just take the budgeted number and just roll it forward. We take the actual people that are in those jobs and what their salaries will be, and that's how it's derived. Comes out to actually very, very close to what the contracted increase is year over year.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, we'll go to Mr. Walsh.
Dr. Title, I'm glad you brought up, if you go to page 82, that page you talked about some of the maintenance figures, and this gets down to some of the historical budgeting stuff that you spoke about to try to get more of a realistic budget. If you go to the second to last line on page 82, the ADA compliance number, 14-15 you budgeted $30,000, you spent zero. 15-16 you budgeted $30,000, you spent zero. And now you're budgeting $30,000 again. Is this the same project that you keep putting off, or is this just some number you just put in there as a hold number?
It's a placeholder because you never know when you're going to have to make a building or a space ADA compliant if somebody comes, if there's a need, if there's some sort of inspection and we have to go in and make something ADA compliant that isn't currently right now, or the student need or a teacher need where we have to do a specific project. If it's not needed, then Tom holds that aside to cover overages elsewhere, which he invariably has because of emergencies that happen elsewhere.
How did we come up with that $30,000 number?
If you look years before what you're seeing in the book, we spent a lot of that money upgrading certain schools that need ADA requirements, whether it's handicap spaces, the bubbled ramps for the sidewalks, getting staff up into the schools. So we have a placeholder we've been using and pulling from. We also look at schools that are getting renovated, larger building project renovation that are going to get those ADA upgrades. So then that year we don't need it, and we hold this towards the end of the year for any other emergencies that have come up.
It just seems to me as though, as you've made upgrades over the years to be in compliance with the ADA requirements, that maybe we've made all the requirements that need
No
to
way.
be done. No?
No way.
The larger
I'd be
ones
happy
that
to
you're
share
holding,
you-
though, for when you do
I
a
could
major
share a report
project.
with you of
Okay.
what we pull from to try
So
and
why
do.
hasn't anything been spent in the last 2 years, not one penny?
Well, mainly because we did Riverfield, big renovation and addition, so they did ADA upgrades there with the renovation. Fairfield Little High School was done. Howland Hill's coming up. So we have lists for those schools where we want to do some more improvements.
Well, I understand, those are big projects. What
Yeah.
small amounts, because I understand how you improperly are saving some of those larger compliance issues for when there's a building project, and you know, based on your capital requests going forward, what's your next priority and things like that. Why hasn't there been any examples of any money being spent out of that line for the last 2 years straight?
Last 2 years, we've had.
I'm not talking about Riverfield. We knew Riverfield's been coming. We've had a building committee formed for Riverfield for like 2 years.
Correct.
So I'm not talking about like that. That's not a reason not to spend the $30,000. I'm looking
No,
for the
but-
one-off situations where you have a student who can't get into a school.
Right.
And that's what that line number's for, and you haven't had that come up in 2 years.
Not
Not
personally.
one penny.
This project isn't in here specifically for a student that can't get into a school.
Mhm.
It's for all ADA upgrades.
Can I ask a question?
Secondly, it's one of the accounts that we can hold off at the beginning of the year. When the budget gets approved July 1st, we start writing POs and start generating projects going.
Tom,
We
can I-
also,
Can I ask a question on that? Just let me, because we're getting, it's almost 11 o'clock. Let me ask a question on this one. This money's put aside for ADA compliant issues outside of major school renovations, correct?
yes.
Okay. It seems to me that those ADA compliant issues would come across one of several different ways, right? One way could be, as Mr. Walsh pointed out, that a student is going to a school, that you found out because that student's coming to the school that there's an ADA compliance issue
Could
with
be a
some
staff
aspect of
member,
that school.
too.
Could be a staff member, right?
correct.
That's one way. Or, for whatever reason, state authorities or whatever could come in, do a review, flag it, and say you're not ADA compliant here.
It's
Is that
possible.
correct?
Possible in a certain area of a site.
Okay. So you keep, what I hear you saying is you keep a running list
Correct.
of each location of ADA compliant issues, or potential ADA compliant issues, which, oh, by the way, is pretty scary because now the entire general public knows that you keep that list, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they could come in and ask for that list, and you could basically be compelled to have to fix all these things.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
A school building doesn't have to meet 100% requirement for ADA compliance per the state of Connecticut.
Okay, so are you convinced, that's good to know, are you convinced then that in all aspects we are compliant and that these items that you flagged should be addressed over time, but you're not against any regulations and not having them addressed?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So this is for those items that are outside large major renovations that you deem to fix in the course of a school year?
Or that we want to do.
Okay. Thank you.
Correct.
It just seems odd to me that over the last 2 years, not one penny's been spent out of this account. It makes it seem as though it's like a private fund for you to put into other projects when you might need it, because not one penny, despite the fact that you have some book or some huge list of all these projects, 88 things that are out of compliance, that you wouldn't spend the funds to have those things done. And it's one of those historical things that Dr. Title talked about, that you're trying to get out of your budget at the beginning of the year, that you're trying to get out of your budget during the budget process to have a more accurate budget, and it just sits there with these zeros, and it begs to whether we should cut it.
It's really how it looks on paper, black and white, that you're looking at now. I can show you years past,
Okay.
multiple projects
Okay.
we've done for teachers and for staff,
right.
for students.
All right, I'll take this offline with you, but with having this entire list of projects that need to be done, it just begs the question of why not just pick one of those projects at a school that's not about to be redone in the next 5 years and have that work done.
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions, comments on these items? All right. That's capital then, right? Or rather, no, that's operations and maintenance. We're on capital. Anything else on capital?
Yes,
Mr. DeWitt?
I have the same question that I had about the maintenance of buildings. So on page 103, I'm not going to take you through the 85 lines before, but under business services, 109,000 of the 115. Maybe we need another piece of data outside of what you have here with us, but I want to know, in that capital, 109,000, what of that capital is going to cause us recurring costs? So if the 41,000 of new, well, pick one of these things.
Yep.
Is chairs, don't care. I'm on board. But if it's something that's going to require maintenance for the next 20 years, I kind of like to know that.
Now, the biggest piece of that is, I'll just pick equipment replacement schools.
Yes,
That was one
please.
of those accounts I flagged that got whacked during the recession, and the
Right.
biggest problem we have is cafeteria tables that are falling apart at the
Right.
elementary level and desperately need to be replaced, and there's no way the school budgets can account for those. And so this is one element in there, is replacing cafeteria tables that are falling apart, as
Which
well
I'm
as
totally
student
good with,
desks.
because that's not going to cause us maintenance.
That's
for the next
correct. That's
20 years.
actually going to help us, because people will have, they won't have some of these tables that are kind of falling apart and are hazardous.
Right.
Right, so that's an example
So
there.
if that's true for those line items,
Yep.
I'm good. But then when you go to the second part of which is the page 161,
That's
which is the $2 million of capital outlay.
Right.
That makes the total 2.5 million, right? So there was the 5 up front, this is basically 2. Some of this is not broken out very well. So the annual refresh of computer hardware, that does have the potential to have long-term effect for maintenance and contracts and software and all that other stuff, right? But what about the 295? And what about the 163?
Okay, so basically, every year, we've got equipment that we can't repair. It falls apart, and it's just, it can't be fixed. But we still need the piece of equipment, and so that's an account for unscheduled breakdown of equipment that needs to be replaced. So that's what that account is. The other ones up top, I mean, that's part of the normal cycle, or what we try to have a normal cycle of upgrading our technology equipment, so we'll last longer. These things are on their
But this
last
was
legs.
highlighted as one of the budget items.
Yes.
That was bolstered by the fact that we haven't.
That's correct.
Found 1.5 million.
Not found. We worked hard for that.
Okay. You found it by working hard, I get it, right? I'm on board with you, believe me. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, this was a part of
Mr.
that.
Walsh's point.
Yes.
That 1.5 doesn't cause us pain long-term.
Right. So this gets us catching up on something that we've been lagging on. You've got computers out there that go back to 2008, with the use we get and kids using them as opposed to adults. They just are going to wear down and are going to be non-functional. So we're catching up on some deferred replacement of the technology capital. I'm sure Nancy would love to talk to you in more detail about it when she's coming back. When she comes in, she's coming in the night you do the tech budget So we certainly can give her a heads up. Nancy Burns.
Then I have the IT budget, that's I won't be here.
Yeah, so I know she's planning to come that night, so if there's specific questions about the tech capital, then she'll be here in person to answer them. I do have some people from the tech department here, but Nancy said she misses you, and
Tell her I miss her, too.
she'd love the opportunity to come in and give you more detail on this, because she's much more articulate about this than I am.
I think the minutes reflect that I miss her, too.
Okay.
Any other,
We're getting
any other
giddy.
questions?
Following up on Mr. DeWitt's page, that 161, that $18,000 for that Holland Hill 2 portable classrooms?
Yes.
Is that equipment going to be able to be reused but once the addition's added on?
Yes.
Okay, so that'll
Yes.
just move over?
That'll just move over.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I feel better if that's the case.
Right, but that's an example of something that we won't bond.
Yes.
It's a
Anything
building
else?
project with non-bondable stuff, so we build it in here.
Yep, okay.
Anything
thanks.
else? All right, seeing none, let's go to the last item, which is dues and fees, and there's really not much to that. Does anybody have any questions on that, comments? All right, seeing that, by going through this entire schedule, we've gone through the entire $165 million budget request. Does anybody have any other items in the review of the book that they'd like to go through before we leave? Mr. Timniak, I saw your hand first.
You can go to Mr. Walsh if you want.
You can go
No,
first.
well, you went-
Okay, real quick. Thank you very much. I know it's pushing 11 o'clock, and I think the answers were good.
Been here later than that.
Yeah. So, going back at the beginning, and it's just a general question. If we didn't have the healthcare savings and you were forced to give us to cut back on what we talked about as a 4% increase or so, because you said you wouldn't have given the board that, what areas of the budget would have you looked to roll back or to push off for the next year to give us a lower number had we not had the healthcare savings?
Well, I think you've identified most of them. I think we've been pretty clear about where we put the, additional funding in. I think tech capital would be one of them. I think that probably the maintenance projects would probably roll that back to the same number. I think some of the other maintenance areas, wouldn't have been able to do some of the, increases there. Probably wouldn't have been able to do all that we want to do in textbooks. I think that's something we'd have to, take a look at. But, your budget probably would have come in, but my budget proposal probably was going to be in the high threes without the healthcare savings. Probably about the midpoint of the two numbers. Not that saying you would have loved that, but there would have been a lot more sort of fixed cost in there that you might have said, hey, look, what can you do? Healthcare is going up $2 million. So those were the areas that we tried to take advantage of. But, and I'm not saying that should this budget get cut, those are the areas that will get cut, because that's a decision for the board to make. And as we look at it, we might say, no, that's not what we want to do. So I don't want to, by mentioning this, signal that that's where any potential cut would happen. The board could decide to prioritize, in another way. But clearly, I think I've been pretty obvious, clear, transparent, or whatever, about where these increases are. We didn't bury them anywhere. We put them out there, listed them, and put the price tag against them. So I think those were the highlights. And I think it's, an opportunity, and I know the town's extremely appreciative of the work we did to save, this much money, and I think it's an opportunity to do some, reinvestment in getting some of these things up to make up for some lost ground without having to come in with that outrageous number.
Before, I guess, the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance makes their vote, is there an opportunity to get an updated projection on anticipated teachers' retirements, anticipated enrollment, so we can have, I know it's not much time, I think we're talking about 30 days or so.
Not even.
Not even, yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I think you'll get it. Yeah, I don't think you're going to get you're not going to get anything new on enrollment. Teacher retirements, you're not going to get a whole lot of action between now and the end of the month, basically, is what you're talking about. What, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? I think the biggest new piece of information you're going to get is the medical. I mean, I think that's where the game is at this point. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of other information about our budget that's going to happen between now and voting time. I think the biggest unknown will be, if Aon steps on the gas, 2 months more of experience. Because even with the numbers that Mr. Tetro used, that was through December. So I think if we push Aon, we should be able to get a number back through February.
And I'll say, even if you stretched it another month to when the RTM was going to act, teachers do not tell us that, like in February, they're going to retire. Generally, Ann will be asked by the Board of Ed, so how many retirements do we have at the end of May? And it will be less than what we've budgeted for. Sometimes we don't hear from teachers till June or the last day of school.
It's true.
Because they really do not want to spend the last 2 months talking to students, oh, you shouldn't retire, stick around. So teachers historically kind of wait till the end of the school year to make announcements. Not all of them, but so even if you waited till the RTM was going to act, you're not likely to get a real updated number that could convince you that you could do more than 18.
All right. Thank you both.
Right. Just so you know, right now we have 4.
We're going to go to Mr. Walsh.
You mentioned, it came up twice, actually, during your presentation, initial presentation, and then along the way, about this keyboarding thing. One was, I think, $50,000 worth of equipment costs.
Right.
Plus a 0.4 of, for an employee, full-time equivalent.
Yep.
Can you just briefly describe, I presume you're talking about musical keyboards,
Music
not
keyboarding.
keyboards for a computer.
That's correct.
Correct?
Yes.
So is that a required
It's,
program?
Yeah, so music is required in our middle school program in all 3 grades. You either participate, I'm going to have Meg Boyce come up here in a second if I get this wrong, so just kick me. Okay, so in all 3 grades, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, if a student participates in a performing group, that's their music. So if you're in band, chorus, or orchestra, that's what you do, and you do that for 3 years. If you don't do any of the performing groups, then your music program is music keyboarding. Right? And over the years, what's happened is that we've not been able to keep up with the technology for that, and the keyboards have been less than stellar. Plus, we have had more kids who need to go into keyboarding, particularly in 8th grade, as there's not a lot of attrition out of our music program because it really does a great job of keeping kids in, but kids do, over time, stop playing instruments. It just happens. So we've ended up with, to some extent, a little bit of an overflow in 8th grade, and we didn't have enough staff to teach the music keyboarding for them, and so they ended up with a study hall, which is not what you want in middle school. No study halls. We can't let them loose like that. I have one. We've got to keep them contained. So that's the problem we're trying to solve. So there's 2 things. And one reason why there's been somewhat of an issue is kids come in, some kids are in it in 6th grade, they're in it in 7th grade, they're in it in 8th grade. Our current technology that we have doesn't allow it all to be individualized for each student. Some kids come in 8th grade, and they're just starting. So we upgrade the equipment. The equipment can be customized to where the kid is in the program, and you'll get much better teaching out of it. We need to upgrade the keyboards anyways, and so we're solving sort of 2 problems at once. The outdated technology, that's the 50,000, and then the fact that we've got middle school kids who are in study halls, that's the 0.4.
Okay, so basically, this keyboarding program is basically a catch-all for people who don't want to do band or chorus.
That's correct, or
So
orchestra.
It's a catch-all.
It's correct. It's the default.
Okay.
Right. So everybody, we believe, our program is every middle school student takes music every year.
Okay.
That's
what we do.
Is that going to be something you think is going to continue? I mean, as opposed
I think
to
it's
doing another
important.
art or something?
What's that?
As opposed to doing some other form of art or something else? If
Oh, no, they do other,
program?
they do other, it's backed up against PE, is it not, Dr. Boyce? Right, so it's opposite the PE. The art and the computer science and the tech ed and the family consumer science, that's all in a different block. So they're getting other non-academic, for lack of a better word, courses, but there's a period in the day where they do music sort of half the time, PE half the time. The music part of that is either the performing groups or the keyboarding. And there's a separate period where they rotate through the unified arts. It's the middle school program.
Mrs. McCardle, ditto.
Just a quick question. So
Yep.
what happened to general music?
It is non-existent. Very unpopular, very difficult to sustain. The music department, we've had that conversation with them. In fact, in reviewing this, do you want to go back to general music? And it was like, not at all. Keyboarding, when it's done well, the kids like it, they're into it, they're composing. It's not just frivolous stuff. So there's an art to it, there's a creativity to it, it's a high-interest subject, and it is real music. And I think creating and composing music is, just as important, but I mean, you think back to being, 13 or 14 years old, and you take general music, and they put the vinyl album on and you listen to Bach. That's probably not something their average middle schooler really takes to. So it's not there.
So, any other questions? Seeing none, Dr. Title, well, I'm going to turn it over to the public for any public comment.
Okay.
But before I do that, I want to take the opportunity to thank you, your last budget presentation to us. We've worked with you very closely over this last 5 or 6 years. We've had some very interesting discussions at these tables. You and your team has always been well prepared, has always been very diligent. You've always paid attention to our questions, our thoughts. You've always been open and transparent. What I don't think the general public realizes is how much time we spend following up on things behind closed doors. How many conversations have taken place over weekends, over weeknights, in preparation for these meetings, or the diligence that you and your team have done behind the scenes. On behalf of our board, I would like to thank you for all that hard work. You've made great strides in the presentation of the financial information of the school district to this board. You've been a very good partner with us at living up to your word, at working on things with the town side, such as the medical retention fund. You capped it off. Great kudos for the work that was done with the medical insurance this past year. You and your board members worked very hard and did some very nice things in the contract negotiations that you went through the last years. So I think we owe you a great debt of gratitude for that. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot. I will say that I've always enjoyed this as prickly as I can get sometimes. I really enjoy the jousting. And I'm very passionate about, obviously, the school system. It's not my school system, it's the town school system. I'm just the custodian of it for a few years. But I have always found this Board of Selectmen, always well-prepared, good questions, high-level stuff, very respectful. I mean, I have to say, it's really been a pleasure to present a budget and have a conversation with a bunch of adults who are really on top of their game. It keeps me on top of my game, and it's always been really a positive experience, regardless of the outcome. I always feel like we got a fair hearing here. I always feel that way at all the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen meetings that I've been to over time. I always feel like Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen have been at least open to listening to what our pitch is. Don't always agree with it, but that's something I'll definitely take with me when I exit. So thank you.
Okay. And we'll see you because you got a few more months to go.
I got a few more meetings.
Yeah. All right, I'll open it up to the public. Well, first of all, do any board members have anything they want to say? I didn't mean to hog that. Mr. Walsh.
I would also like to thank Dr. Title for his service to the town as well. And it's been, having worked on different bodies with other people in your seat, it was quite refreshing. And I guess I'm directing this towards Phil a little bit, and as you search for a replacement, which I think it's going to be very difficult, to be quite honest with you. To find somebody with your business mind as you have approached this job. You have found savings in certain areas that we never knew we could do before, and other superintendents have not pointed out. You gave a very good analysis once you came in here about areas you thought we could save on, and keeping what I would say was a reasonable increase in your budget in some difficult times when we needed them. So I would hope that when we find somebody else, sometimes I've found some past superintendents have been more program-oriented, I guess, or whatever. You gave a good balance between both that, but also the finance side. And you could always talk to the finance side, and it was not fuzzy math. It was, it was well thought out. You knew the numbers. You knew all the numbers. I knew that coming in, you knew that, and you delivered. And so I appreciate all that, and I just hope that as we go forward that consideration is given to follow someone of like mind as they appear before this body. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? All right, seeing none, we're going to open this up for public comment. Please come up. If you have something to say, please name, address, role if you like. Let's keep it timely and hopefully not a lot of repetitive, because the repetitive is left to this board. No, go right ahead.
Hi, I'm Bob Smoller, President of the Fairfield Education Association. And I just wanted to make a comment about the health insurance, just to put it in perspective a little bit. The savings is great, but I just want you to know it was a pretty heavy lift going in the middle of a contract period and getting members to agree to a change in the health insurance plan that they were very happy with. But Dr. Title presented us with the opportunity. It seemed like a viable option, and so we did the necessary work to make it happen. But part of that discussion was also that this would be an opportunity for us to do some of the catch-up that we feel every day in the schools. And so my only request to you would be that, a big impetus for the teachers pushing hard to get this savings through was the hope that a lot of this catch-up that's been kind of lagging over the years since the recession hit, quite honestly, might finally take place. We might finally get world language back into elementary school. I mean, it's kind of hard to say at a day and age when we're in a global economy. My son lives in Japan. They teach English in kindergarten there. We don't have a world language program all the way down to kindergarten. So, I know I'm emphasizing this a little bit much, but I do hope that, you will feel good about the work that was done on the healthcare side and trying to get those savings. And I hope you'll also feel good about investing that money in the catch-up so the people in the schools who are working with the kids every day can accomplish the work that we're trying to accomplish. So
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments, and thank you for working with the administration on the medical.
If I stayed this long, I had to speak. So every year, I always like to say this to you guys. I appreciate so much the way these meetings are run. I think that you guys do an incredibly thorough job, and I really appreciate all the time and all the questions, because it's important for us to hear all these very thoughtful questions and answers. So I appreciate that. I'd also like to really strenuously support the idea of doing this investment of the savings. I think it's really important to understand, as you've pointed out in tonight's meeting, that a lot of it is a one-time cost, and this is a one-time savings, and this is our chance to really make sure that we keep Fairfield and our school district going forward. And it is a bit of a catch-up, and I think our staff has done a really great job of accommodating and making it possible to not realize that we were lacking. And I think that we need these textbooks in math, for instance. That's huge. And as we all know, math was a pretty big topic in the elementary school in terms of curriculum and textbooks. I'd also like to point out that parents also participate in textbooks. I've spent too many hours looking at textbooks to say that parents, and there have been more than just me, so parents, teachers, and administrators do the review of the textbooks. And so we do get to have a say in it as citizens. So thank you very much to all of you and Ms. Dr. Title very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone else like to speak?
Suzanne Miska, 123 Reigate Road, Fairfield, Connecticut. 2 points. First point being the $732,000 to be removed from medical retention as part of the cut. My concern is this: through the Board of Ed budget meeting, a discussion item had come up for $50,000 to add back in, and there was an adamant viewpoint of the Board of Ed that they needed all the money in that account in order to meet their obligations. So my concern is looking at the low, in fact, the decrease on the town side budget, somewhere, somehow, if this thing does turn south, which we have watched it do, someone is going to have to come up with that money. And I have found the discussion on this evening a little confusing as to whether it would be the town off the contingency fund, or if the Board of Ed would then be on the hook for the $732 once it had been removed from their budget. So I think that needs to be clarified. I don't know what happened in discussion that this was all of a sudden an acceptable thing, because we did, like I said, watch during the Board of Ed that the Board of Ed seemed very strong about keeping that amount in medical retention because of the problems that have happened. On the keyboard issue, my son was one of the lucky ones who pulled the card and didn't have to take keyboards. He got study hall. There are kids who like study hall. I think keyboards need to be redone, but I don't know that that should be a mandatory requirement curriculum-wise. I think if that's going to be the case, then it really should come back to the board to have a discussion on making the addition to that person. Some kids don't like music. They'll do it 6th and 7th grade. My son sang in the chorus, had no other interest in music. In fact, if general music was offered, he'd probably love it because he does love classical music. Every kid's a little bit different. My other concern is on the math textbook. The math curriculum at the elementary level has been in existence for 3 years. Various members of the board have been asking to have that curriculum reviewed before the textbook is approved. I think that has to take place before a textbook is approved for the $500,000. The world language program, I think it is important to bring it back to the elementary level, but there was a consensus and a consideration by this administration not to fund world language when it was cut and bring it back until this point. The problem that I think everyone is experiencing is this curriculum has changed 6th, 7th through 12th. The level of children coming out of elementary cannot meet the new requirements at the middle school and the high school. The students are not where they need to be in order to meet those curriculum levels. So while I think it's great to put world language back into the schools, and I think that's where it needs to be, I do think we need to look at the back history that has happened as to why it hasn't been funded. There has been a decision not to do it. It's great that it's back in there, but we can't just look that it was a budget cut without saying that we did make a concerted effort not to put it in. In fact, for a long time, it was that the instructional time for LA was more important. So I think we have to keep things into perspective as we look at them. I think technology is very important. On the other side of this equation, technology also was funded and moved to something else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. I will remind the general public that both these bodies, the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, only get to vote on one number. We don't get to vote on a line item by line item basis. That's the job and the responsibility of the Board of Education. Even Dr. Title, as he alluded to earlier tonight, if something changes, and I'm not saying that it will, but if something were to change, the authority as to how those monies are spent and what gets changed is under the sole discretion of the Board of Education, not these two bodies, and not Dr. Title. So that's just something to be aware, because we do get a lot of email during the course of the budget season, which is absolutely appropriate, saying don't cut this program, don't cut that program, don't cut this, don't cut that, don't support this, don't support that. And that's not really within our purview. And it's just worth noting. So I thank the Board of Education for the time tonight. We do have two much smaller budgets that we need to complete very quickly at the board. And thank you, everybody else in the audience, for being here. Let's go right now to page 174, which is private transportation. This is the school bus, and I just picked 174 first because it's first up in the pagination. The private school bus transportation lines, and these are for the private schools around town. Any of our newer colleagues here at the table, do you need any specific information? Or is there something you might not understand about this budget before we go into it? And I don't mean that. Please understand that how I meant it, because I was confused the first time I sat at this table by it. Anybody? Seeing none. Is this just the contractual increase for the same number of routes, et cetera, offset by the savings in
Correct.
fuel costs? So it's very similar to the transportation line within the Board of Ed budget?
Yes.
Does anybody have any questions? Mr. DeWitt?
I thought we were predicting overall fuel reduction costs on the town side. Why is this going up not quite double? I mean, I know it's contractual, I'm just kind of more of a curiosity than anything else. I thought we've been trending down on the town side with fuel costs. Isn't that right, Mr. Tetro?
Yes, we have, but I think that, is this
There's a contractual increase with the cost of the bus.
bus, it's not, the fuel might be lower, but the overall cost might go up because of the contractual cost of the bus.
Oh, it might
If
be
I
a
said that
longer route.
correctly.
and-
Well, no, it's a multi-year contract, and there are increases built in. We stripped the fuel out, thankfully. Very wise decision. So we're able to take advantage of the savings, but the cost of the buses, I believe, go up year to year. I don't remember the
Right,
contract off.
2.5%.
Well, there is a fuel cost line in here. On page 174, the fourth number down is fuel cost, and it's gone from 54,000 to 95,000. And it's more than half of the increase in the variance increase, right? So again, my point, I get the bus contract, the first line, I get it. I'm just
Right.
curious why
You're absolutely
we,
right.
on the town
Nope.
side, are trending down, and this is trending.
Good question. On the town side, we estimate based on two components. Going back to Mr. Flynn's constant question about is it volume or is it pricing?
Right.
So the department heads, in essence, estimate the number of units they will use.
Yep.
And then purchasing, based on the pricing we're getting on fuel, puts in the price. So the price is the same for all departments on the town side. The
Right.
only fluctuation is the units.
Units, right.
And the question around the units is always, are you seeing a different usage this year or projecting a different usage versus past year? So that's our discussion on that side. I'd have to refer back to the Board of Ed to see what the discussion is here.
Yeah, I think there was we had to change the allocation because there was an additional bus added post-budget last year. So the fuel wasn't budgeted
It's still,
based on what they're.
That's a fairly significant
huge
increase. I mean, it's 41,000, it's a $41,000 increase on a $54,000 budget, so unless that's like 12 buses, I'm kind of
I can-
curious.
I'm
You
kind
follow
of
up
filling
on
in
that?
for John right
I
now.
I appreciate that, thank
I'll look
you.
into the details of
I
that.
think it's an excellent question, because not only is it like 12 buses, the rates have gone way down too.
Well, exactly.
Right, so I mean, even if it was
That's like
another
24
bus,
buses.
you would think that it'd be,
Exactly.
right.
There's
It's
two
an excellent
things-
question.
There are two things that should be pushing it in that lower direction.
And on the Parks and Rec line, just by way of a very small indicator, that did go down for fuel.
Exactly, yep.
So,
And DPW, I think, went down too. If I remember that.
So can we follow up on that? It might be a calculation error, maybe it's a good guy.
I was just pointing out the Parks and Rec line because it's in this page.
Right.
It's a small number, but it's in this
Oh, I know
page.
what you're
That's all.
saying, yeah.
Any other questions on this budget? So we have one follow-up item here. Thank you. And then we're going to go to budget, we're going to go to Health and Welfare Services, which is just the next page, which is 176, 177. And this essentially remains flat year over year.
That's right, it's just the contractual adjustments. FTE remains the same, the purpose of the account remains the same.
Is there any other questions, comments on this budget? Seeing none, before we dismiss for the night, I should note that within the Board of Education budget, for the first time, we actually had a program budget that I've been asking for and others have been asking for a long period of time. And we didn't go through that tonight. We do have a second night for follow-up questions and stuff like that. I would ask just all the members to take a look at that page and see if you have any questions, comments, concerns. And I know this was, for lack of a better way to put it, this was the first attempt at doing this, right? This was not a full, complete attempt. You're still waiting on what's going to go on with the state and if there's going to be a general ledger. But I did want to note the attempt, and I did want to point it out so that we have any questions. And what I mean by program budget, what do we spend on art? What do we spend on social studies? What do we spend on math? So it's pretty interesting stuff. It's probably not fully allocated, and you could probably argue the allocation methodologies, but I wanted to point it out there, and let's get any questions, comments, concerns on the table. And Mr. Brown, keeping me honest here, has pointed out the page, which, my poor eyesight, it's 122 in that budget book, okay? So thank you for that. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn. I'm going to go with Mr. Stone. I saw him make it. Mr. Mottola. All in favor? All opposed? Abstentions? We're done. Good night, everybody, and thank you so much.